Chapter 6:15. When Tuki heard Saionji Tsunekatsu's words, he was shocked. He said in surprise, "Changsheng, are you crazy? There are several Jinshin masters here." Saionji Tsunekatsu smiled coldly and said, "When the enemy thinks they have won, it is the beginning of their failure. Do you think I don't know that there are Jinshin masters here? In a while, you will use the Shikigami to make a little noise nearby. As long as there is chaos, the auction house will definitely immediately put away all these auction items, and the cultivators here should not be allowed to follow them in. Go to the internet. 7KOM. As long as this Medicine King tripod can get out of the sight of these cultivators, I have a way to get it away." Tuki was stunned for a moment. He said worriedly, "But Changsheng, if you do this, will it cause mutual hatred and confrontation between the Chinese and Japanese cultivators?" Saionji Tsunekatsu turned his face ferocious. He stared at Tuki coldly, suppressed his anger, and growled in a low voice, "Tuki, come with me." Tuki was frightened by Saionji Tsunekatsu's appearance and took a step back, but he quickly lowered his head and whispered, "Yes, Changsheng." Saionji Tsunekatsu took Tuki to a bathroom. After he was sure that there was no one inside, he suddenly turned around, holding a vajra in one hand and a mantra finger in the other, and pushed it in front of Tuki. Tuki was about 175 meters tall, and he was not thin, but when he was pushed in the air by Saionji Tsunekatsu, his whole body suddenly flew up and hit the wall behind him. The tile wall was dented, and for a moment, the white tiles fell down. Saionji Tsunekatsu roared angrily, "You idiot! Since Li Yundong defeated Miss Tachibana Wakako, the two sides have been enemies. Now Masako Tachibana has been forced into a corner by the other sects of the new meaning school and the ancient meaning school. She must defeat Li Yundong in public to save her face. Otherwise, we will kneel down in the hands of those idiots who changed the doctrine." Tuki felt as though he was being pressed against the wall by an invisible hand. He was in so much pain that he could not speak. He could only speak intermittently, I understand. Lord Changsheng, quickly let me go. I will do as you say." Saionji Tsunekatsu retracted his hand slightly, and the anger on his face dissipated slightly. He snorted coldly and said, "If you know, hurry up and do it outside. Make some noise." As soon as Saionji Tsunekatsu finished speaking, he frowned and waved his fingers. The door of the bathroom closed automatically with a bang. Coincidentally, a man was rushing to the washroom, but he couldn't open the door no matter how hard he tried. Saionji Tsunekatsu stared at the door for a while. When he saw that the people who tried to enter the door had left and stopped trying to open the door, he turned his face and stared at Tuki. Tuki rubbed his chest. He did not dare to be negligent. He quickly took out a few talismans from his pocket. One hand was pinching his fingers, and the other hand was holding the talismans with his index and middle fingers. He put them across his chest and recited a spell in a low voice. As soon as he recited the spell, the two talismans burned with a bang. Black smoke came out of the talismans and drilled out through the crack in the door of the washroom. Just as Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki were hiding in the washroom and plotting, Shinyu surrounded Shinwankai like a fly and said, "Dad, the company doesn't have much liquidity now. Where can we get 700 million yuan? Dad, 700 million yuan to buy such a thing? It's okay if you buy it yourself. Why did you give it to an outsider? Dad, I'm talking to you. Please, I'm your son, your only son. Can you take a look at me? I also have a share of the property of this family. You can't mess around like this, can you?" Shinyu's last words stimulated Shinwankai. He reluctantly smiled at the people who came to congratulate him and compliment him. Then he turned around and pulled Shinyu to a deserted corner with a normal face. His face suddenly changed, he gritted his teeth and said angrily, "You know, everything in this family is made by me, Shinwankai, alone. Without me, there would be no you in this world. Without me, you would not have the luxury you have now. Don't think you're great just because you've done a few business worth millions. Let me tell you, without me, you're nothing. If it weren't for my face, for the sake of the country I've fought for with my own hands, would they cooperate with an idiot like you? Shen Wankai mercilessly scolded his son, who hated iron for not becoming steel. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Do you think your wings are hard now? How dare you talk to me like this? Let me tell you, even if I lose all my property one day, I won't leave you a penny. When you start from scratch and lay down such a large foundation as mine, you can tell me that you also have a share of the property of this family." Shen Yu was stunned by Shen Wansai's scolding. For a moment, he was stunned on the spot and couldn't come back to his senses. In his mind, he really couldn't understand why his father would rather spend 700 million yuan to buy an inexplicable Medicine King tripod than leave a penny for him. Why was his father willing to give the 700 million yuan item to an outsider instead of giving more money to his own son? Wasn't he his own son? Shen Yu trembled all over and looked at his father in disbelief, as if he were looking at a stranger. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. Suddenly, he turned around and looked at Li Jiandong fiercely. Seeing this, Shen Wankai immediately shouted, "If you dare to act recklessly, I will immediately break off the relationship between father and son." Shen Yu's whole body shook violently. He looked back at Shen Wankai in despair. The corner of his mouth twitched, revealing a bitter smile. He laughed, turned around, and rushed out of the auction hall while laughing. Shen Wansai's eyes were fixed on Shen Yu's figure, and his whole body was trembling slightly. At this time, Shen Hui also came over and said cautiously, "Old master, don't be angry with my brother. Shen Wankai said in a tired and low voice, "Don't mention him, if you still have a little filial piety." Shen Hui obediently closed her mouth and didn't say anything. Shen Wankai seemed to have aged dozens of years in an instant. His face was haggard and wrinkled. He covered his chest, his face full of pain, and his body fell back little by little. Seeing this, Shen Hui immediately held him up and shouted, "Help, help." As soon as Shen Hui's voice fell, she heard a calm and magnetic voice next to her. "Don't worry, let me see." Shen Hui turned her head and saw Li Jiandong holding Shen Wansai's hand and talking to her calmly. She knew that Li Jiandong was a strange man with divine skills. In addition, he had once saved Shen Wansai's life, so she didn't dare to show her temper in front of Li Jiandong. Shen Hui asked anxiously, "How is the old man?" As Li Jiandong slowly transferred his Jinqi to Shen Wankai, he said in a low voice, "Mr. Shen is fine. He's just angry, and his qi and blood are not enough." Shen Hui asked in confusion, "But after you saved the old man last time, wasn't he very good? I think he was more than 10 years younger at that time. Why did he suddenly become like this?" Li Jiandong sighed softly and said, "Mr. Shen is now in a declining body. All parts of his body and organs are relatively weak. If he goes down, it will be the stage of failure and death. At this stage, people can rely on elixirs to protect themselves for a while, but it is unlikely that one pill can make him return to his youth, let alone completely change his physique." Shen Hui looked at Li Jiandong without understanding. She remembered the magic of this boy, and then remembered that her father had spent a lot of money to buy the Medicine King tripod, and then wanted to give it to the boy in front of her. Suddenly, her heart moved, as if she had understood something, and there were a few clear lights in her eyes. Li Jiandong's Jinqi was pure and vigorous. After only a while, Shen Wansai's complexion was obviously better. He let out a long breath, smiled at Li Jiandong gratefully, and said, "Child Li, you saved my life again. I really don't know how to thank you." Li Jiandong smiled slightly and said, "It's nothing. You don't have to thank me. What's more, Mr. Shen took back the Medicine King tripod from the Japanese. I should be the one to thank." Shen Wankai held Li Jiandong's hand tightly and asked nervously, "Child Li, you haven't answered my presumptuous request just now." Li Jiandong thought for a while, sighed softly, and said, "Mr. Shen, your gift is too expensive. I can't accept it." Shen Wankai had experienced many vicissitudes of life and had rich experience. When he saw Li Jiandong's hesitation, he immediately understood. He sighed and said bitterly, "Child Li, you saw it just now. I only have one son. I expected him to become a talent and inherit my family business in the future. But I didn't expect. Alas, I can't help him." At this time, Shen Wankai also seemed to have put aside the knot in his heart. Regardless of the presence of Shen Hui, he said to Li Jiandong sincerely, "Child Li, I know that you must not be immortal. I also know that if I do this, you will definitely be unhappy in your heart. But I really have no choice. My only son is so useless. In the future, if the family business is handed over to him, how can I rest assured? I am already half a body in the ground. In the past, the only hope was that this son could become a talent, but now the only hope I have is that you, Child Li, can teach me the magic of immortals. Even if I can't live forever, I can at least live a few more years. Is such a request too much?" When Shen Wankai spoke of his sadness, not only were his eyes full of tears, but Shen Hui also looked sad. She whispered comforting words to Shen Wankai while crying. Li Jiandong originally had a lot of unhappiness in his heart, but at this time, he couldn't help but dissipate a lot. He sighed softly, smiled slightly, and said, "I understand. Let me think about it for 2 days, okay? 2 days later, I will definitely give you an answer." There was a hopeful look in Shen Wankai's eyes. He straightened his body slightly and said in a trembling voice, "Child Li, I'll wait for your news." Li Jiandong smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly heard a loud bang coming from not far away, followed by a sharp scream. "Murder, murder!" At this time, some of the cultivators who had not left the auction house looked in the direction of the sound in surprise. Su Chan curiously approached Li Jiandong and whispered, "Who is tired of living and making trouble here?" As she said this, the little girl raised her head and blinked her eyes. "Yundong, do you want to go and see what's going on?" Li Jiandong smiled slightly. "Okay." Just as he was about to continue speaking, he saw that the people of the auction house were all nervous. They asked the security guards to escort the Medicine King tripod to the backstage. At the same time, they shouted at Shen Wankai to let him go with them. Shen Wankai said to Li Jiandong, "Child Li, why don't you go with me?" Li Jiandong looked around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at him intentionally or unintentionally. He knew that he was already in the teeth of the storm at this time, so he didn't want to be so ostentatious, so he said, "No, if you are worried about safety, let Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin accompany you. With them here, it will be fine." At this time, Ao Wushuang also said, "Leader, you go. I'll help you keep an eye on it. It will be fine." Li Jiandong originally wanted Ao Wushuang to stay as well. At this time, seeing that she had taken the initiative to volunteer, he was immediately overjoyed and said, "That's great. With Senior Ao Wushuang, I can rest assured." Chapter 6:16. Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and Ao Wushuang accompanied Shen Wankai to the inner hall of the auction house. Just as they were about to enter, the head of security of the auction house stopped Zi Yuan and the others. After looking Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and Ao Wushuang up and down, his eyes flashed with amazement. He turned to Shen Wankai and asked, "May I ask who they are?" "Mr. Shen, only you can go in with us. Let's go." Although Shen Wankai didn't know who Ao Wushuang was, nor did he know what kind of ability Zhou Qin, the daughter of a noble family, had, he knew Zi Yuan's ability. Moreover, Li Jiandong valued Ao Wushuang so much that he had to speak up to protect her. He smiled and said, "They are my protectors. Let them go in with us." The person in charge sneered in his heart and thought to himself, "Do you think you are Gaddafi? Get a large group of beautiful bodyguards? I think they are your mistresses, right?" He shook his head and said, "No, Mr. Shen, only you can go in alone." Shen Wankai frowned secretly and looked a little unhappy. Just as he was about to speak, Zhou Qin asked, the Medicine King tripod is such an important thing. If it is lost or robbed, can you bear the responsibility? The person in charge sneered and said, do you know what we used to do? If we can't control it, can you? Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she suddenly heard a loud bang coming from the inner hall, followed by a few screams. The face of the head of security suddenly changed. He couldn't care less about Zhou Qin and the others. He turned around and rushed to the inner hall behind him. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and quickly followed him in. As soon as the two of them rushed into the inner hall, they found several uniformed security guards sitting limply in the corner of the wall. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. There was an obvious dent in the wall behind them. It was obvious that they had been thrown out like a sandbag and smashed against the wall. At this time, the Medicine King tripod was stored on a display stand, protected by a thick bulletproof glass cover. It was safe and sound. The head of security was about to breathe a sigh of relief when he suddenly heard a loud crash. The hard and thick glass cover instantly shattered, as if it had been slapped by an invisible hand. As soon as the glass cover was smashed, the Medicine King tripod floated up out of thin air. The head of security was shocked when he saw this. He pulled out the pistol from his waist and was about to shoot. But there was nothing in front of him. The Medicine King tripod was also floating in the air. Where was there anyone? Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly felt a strong gust of wind, as if he was pushed by a giant hand. Then, his whole body flew out and hit the wall with a loud bang. Then, his body softly fell to the ground. Zhou Qin's eyes widened and she shouted in a low voice, Goddess Nyan Seal? She quickly pulled out the Vulcan's whip wrapped around her waist and shook her wrist. The long whip made a loud sound of breaking through the air and lashed in the direction of the Medicine King tripod. With a "pa" sound, the Vulcan's whip suddenly hit something. The tip of the Vulcan's whip instantly refracted a faint ripple, so that Zhou Qin and others could vaguely recognize that it was an invisible man about 2 meters tall. But as soon as Zhou Qin whipped him, the invisible man's figure disappeared in an instant, and he rushed towards the window with a howl. Oh no, he's going to steal the Medicine King tripod. Zi Yuan suddenly shouted, stop him. A purple light flashed beside Zi Yuan in an instant, and the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk instantly appeared in front of the invisible man like a big net. With a muffled sound, the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk seemed to have been hit heavily by a huge palm in an instant, forming a terrible claw print. Zi Yuan saw that the hand was tightly wrapped by the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk, so it showed traces. The fingers of this hand were thick and long, and the nails were as sharp as bayonets. The muscles on the arm were even more bumpy, like a sack full of potatoes. It didn't look like a human arm at all. With a move of her mind, Zi Yuan quickly controlled the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk to extend quickly, entangling the invisible humanoid monster. With a schwa sound, the Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand was also thrown out, and it tightly wrapped around his ankle. As soon as her Vulcan's whip was wrapped around, there was a burst of fire at one end of the Vulcan's whip with a bang, constantly burning the invisible monster. The monster seemed to know that he couldn't escape. He took a deep breath and roared in the direction of the glass window. Howl! The invisible monster's mouth fiercely emitted a shockwave. This loud roar suddenly shook the entire building. Shen Wankai was knocked out without saying a word. Although the glass window that bore the brunt of the impact was hard-tempered glass, it was shaken by the strong shock wave and immediately shattered with a crash. The invisible monster held the Medicine King cauldron in its other hand and threw it out. At the moment he threw it out, his upper body was completely entangled by the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk, and his lower body and ankles began to burn with raging fire. For a moment, the monster let out a terrible howl, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a black smoke and disappeared. Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin's faces changed greatly, and they said in unison, "Oh no, it's the Medicine King tripod." At the moment when the Medicine King tripod was thrown out, a figure flashed past them, and Ao Wushuang chased after it like lightning. In the blink of an eye, Ao Wushuang chased after the Medicine King tripod. She reached out to take it, but suddenly felt a terrible force coming from behind her. This force was not only fierce, but also full of powerful Buddhist power, which happened to restrain her demon power. She suddenly shivered and quickly dodged. Ao Wushuang's figure flashed, and a golden light immediately flashed in her original position. This golden light did not stop. In an instant, it passed through the Medicine King tripod and pulled it to the horizon. Ao Wushuang was furious. She gritted her teeth and was about to chase after it, but suddenly her heart moved, as if she had thought of something. For a moment, she couldn't help but hesitate. The battle between masters only lasted for an instant. As Ao Wushuang hesitated, the Medicine King tripod and the golden light instantly disappeared into the horizon. At this time, it was too late to chase after them. Ao Wushuang's eyes flickered as she looked in the direction where the Medicine King tripod had disappeared. She snorted coldly to herself, and her figure flashed and she instantly returned to the inner hall. When Ziyuan and Zhou Qin saw that Ao Wushuang had returned in the blink of an eye with empty hands, their hearts suddenly thumped, and at the same time, an ominous thought flashed through their minds. Zhou Qin was shocked and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, where is the Medicine King tripod?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and sighed. "I didn't catch up." Ziyuan couldn't help but be moved. "Even you didn't catch up? Who the hell is this person?" Ao Wushuang's expression was a little unnatural. She was about to speak when she saw many people rushing into the room. There were cultivators from various sects, Shen Wansai's daughter, Shen Hui, Li Yundong, and Su Chan. What happened? Li Yundong looked at the messy scene in the room in shock. Su Chan glanced around and asked subconsciously, "Have you been robbed?" Seeing that Su Chan's subconscious words had hit the nail on the head, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Ao Wushuang walked up to Li Yundong and said with a look of shame, "Leader, I failed to live up to your trust and let someone take away the Medicine King tripod in front of me." "What? The Medicine King tripod was taken away?" When the others in the room heard this, they almost jumped up and shouted in surprise. Some cultivators from the cultivation sects pointed at Ao Wushuang and took the opportunity to attack her. "What are you doing? You can't even keep an eye on such an important thing as the Medicine King tripod. Ao Wushuang, tell me. Did you take it for yourself? Ao Wushuang, were you instructed by Li Yundong?" Ao Wushuang's face was as cold as frost, and the anger between her eyebrows was getting stronger and stronger. Just as she was about to lose her temper, Li Yundong suddenly turned his head and shouted angrily, "Shut up." Although Li Yundong's voice was not very loud, it contained the power of a Buddhist staff. Everyone only felt a buzzing sound in their ears, as if thousands of bells were ringing at the same time, shaking the qi and blood in their chests. The people who had been noisy before were suddenly shocked and shut their mouths one after another. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, also said angrily, "You idiots. Just now, Mr. Shen wanted to give my master the Medicine King tripod, but my master didn't immediately agree. What reason does he have to steal it?" This question made everyone speechless for a while. Some of those who wanted to find fault with him also snorted and didn't say anything. Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He took a deep breath and asked Ziyuan in a low voice what had happened. After pondering for a while, he said angrily, "Damn it, we fell into the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain and creating a ruckus in the east while attacking in the west." Ziyuan asked in a low voice, "Did someone on your side make it on purpose just now?" Li Yundong nodded. The movement there just now attracted the attention of almost all cultivators. "When we went over to take a look, we saw an invisible monster running amok. After we subdued it, we heard some movement from your side, and then the Medicine King tripod was lost." As Li Yundong spoke, he gritted his teeth and said, "There are so many cultivators here, but they can take things away under our noses. Good method, good method. What a daring person. Who on earth is so bold?" At this time, Ao Wushuang also came over and whispered, I know who it is. Li Yundong immediately raised his eyes and asked in a deep voice, who? Ao Wushuang shook her head. Let's go back and talk. It's not convenient to talk here. Li Yundong nodded. He walked to Shen Hui's side and whispered a few words, asking her to take good care of Shen Wankai. Then he walked out with Su Chan and the others. Seeing this, Zhou Ping couldn't help whispering to Zhang Ling, Master, are we just going to let them go like this? This matter is very strange. Zhang Ling raised her hand and said in a deep voice, let them go. They didn't do it. Zhou Ping was stunned. Why? Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong with bright eyes and sneered. With Li Yundong's current strength and the situation just now, there's no need for him to play such a trick. Hearing Zhang Ling's words, Li Yundong turned his face to look at Zhang Ling, nodded, and then turned to leave. Jingyi School was not only a leading figure in the Taoist cultivation world, but also had a great influence in the Buddhist cultivation world. As soon as Zhang Ling spoke, the cultivators of all sects on the scene no longer stopped them and made way for them. Li Yundong and the others filed out. Just as they were about to leave, the police who had been arranged around the auction house rushed over. A leading policeman shouted at Li Yundong, hey, you can't leave. You are all suspects. You have to stay and make statements. This was the second time yesterday. Chapter 617. Li Yundong frowned and turned around to take a look. This look was not angry, but it was powerful. The policeman's heart beat inexplicably, and he swallowed all the words he wanted to say. Zhou Qin had been entrusted by Li Yundong to take care of Shen Wankai, but Shen Wankai had been knocked unconscious under her nose, and the Medicine King tripod had been snatched away. She had nowhere to vent her anger. At this time, seeing that someone had come to provoke her, she immediately turned her head and shouted at the policeman, if you have the ability, try to keep us here. Call your director here and see if he dares to say such a thing to me. The policeman was shocked by Zhou Qin's tone, but he soon became furious. He had been paid a lot of money to be responsible for the security of the auction, but he hadn't expected such a problem to occur. Now he was looking for someone to take the blame, but he hadn't expected that someone would come to his door and dare to fight against him. Just as he was about to act, a policeman immediately came over and whispered in his ear, hey, Captain Sun, it seems to be Governor Zhou's daughter. Don't mess around. Captain Sun was stunned and said in a low voice, Governor Zhou's daughter? Zhou Kachang? In China, if one wanted to be a qualified public official, or if one wanted to be promoted smoothly, it was necessary to know the names and positions of leaders at all levels and some of their immediate family members. They could have all kinds of misunderstandings and conflicts with ordinary people countless times, but they could never have a misunderstanding and conflict with their superiors. Because if they offended the people, no matter how serious the consequences were, they would at most be dismissed and transferred. After the situation calmed down, they could be quietly promoted back. But if they offended the leaders, they would never be able to get ahead in their lives. Captain Sun looked at Zhou Qin carefully and saw that the girl in front of him was full of heroic spirit. Her eyes were tough and domineering. It was obvious that she had been in a high position for a long time. No matter how good an actor was, he or she would not be able to put on such a show. Captain Sun's anger disappeared. He said with an apologetic smile, it turns out to be Governor Zhou's daughter. I'm sorry. The flood rushed to the Dragon King Temple. Seeing that he had given in, Zhou Qin didn't want to pester him anymore. She snorted coldly and turned around to leave. But at this time, Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping also walked out. Zhou Ping sneered and said, how impressive. If you were half as powerful as you are now, how could the Medicine King tripod have been snatched away? Zhou Qin's face suddenly turned red. She was furious and wanted to refute, but on second thought, she realized that it was indeed the case. This proud and arrogant young lady was so angry that she couldn't speak. She stood rooted to the ground, her eyes filled with unwillingness and anger. Li Yundong glanced at Zhou Ping with a sullen face, then turned to Zhou Qin and said softly, "It's my fault. It's my mistake, it has nothing to do with you. This person can take away the Medicine King tripod under the eyes of you, Zi Yuan, and Senior Ao Wushuang, which means that this person must not be ordinary. And those who dare to snatch the Medicine King tripod in this situation must have an extremely deep background." As Li Yundong spoke, he glanced at Zhou Ping, intentionally or unintentionally. Zhou Ping suddenly jumped up like a rabbit whose tail had been stepped on and shouted, "What are you looking at? What do you mean?" Zhang Ling reached out to stop Zhou Ping. She snorted and said, "Zhenrenli, there's no need to say such meaningful words. Yes, in terms of strength and background, the most suspicious one here is indeed Arjuni school, but Arjuni school is righteous, stable, and has a clear conscience. This Medicine King tripod is the supreme powerful magical weapon of our Taoist school, and it is also a treasure left by our ancestors. As juniors, we don't cherish it, but we lose it. It doesn't seem good? In my opinion, every cultivation sect has the responsibility to find it back. What do you think?" Li Yundong saw that Zhang Ling's words were dignified, but there was no mention of whether or not it would be returned to its original owner after it was found. Moreover, her subtext was, now that the Medicine King tripod has become an ownerless object, whoever gets it will naturally belong to whoever gets it. This sentence hit a deep trap. If Li Yundong followed Zhang Ling's words, he was afraid that he would immediately fall into the trap and suffer a great loss. But Li Yundong's mind moved, and he understood the key point. He smiled slightly and said in the same dignified manner, "Zhenren Zhang, you're right. The Medicine King tripod is the supreme powerful magical weapon of our Taoist school, and everyone has the responsibility to find it back. But since the Medicine King tripod was lost under our noses, it should be found by us. What do you think?" Zhang Ling saw that Li Yundong had easily resolved her words, which were full of traps and deep pits, and at the same time, kicked a ball over. There was a needle hidden in the silk floss, and there was a hidden meaning in his words. It was very difficult to deal with him. Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong for a long time. Suddenly, she put on a fake smile and said, "Zhenrenli, take care of yourself." Li Yundong also smiled and cupped his hands. "Zhenren Zhang, goodbye." After that, he turned around and left with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang, and Chris. Zhang Ling stared at Li Yundong's back. After a long time, she sighed secretly and shook her head. Amazing, really amazing. Zhou Ping also looked in the direction in which Li Yundong and the others had left and sneered. Even the Medicine King tripod can't be guarded. What's so amazing about it? Zhang Ling shook her head and said, "No, the other party is also a master. When masters fight, they must fight for the first opportunity. Whoever can seize the first opportunity will win. So this is not the fault of the battle. If it were us, we would also be trapped." Zhou Ping asked curiously, "Master, what do you think about him?" Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong's figure that had gone far away and sighed. This Li Yundong came out of nowhere half a year ago. When he first made his debut, he was very young and inexperienced. When he talked to me just now, he already had some of the demeanor of a real leader. Hey, it's not surprising that he has such a cultivation quotient at such a young age, but what's surprising is that he reacted so quickly just now. He was able to perceive my intention so quickly and counterattack. For a young man of his age, it's really incredible and commendable that his words and actions are so watertight. Zhou Ping curled her lips disapprovingly. So what? Isn't he just a leader of a group of evildoers? Thousands of years later, the world will only know what Arjuni school is like, but who will know what Li Yundong is like? Zhang Ling chuckled and said meaningfully, "You idiot. He is still the leader of the Fox Zen school. You should be happy." Zhou Ping was tongue-tied. "Master, what do you mean?" Zhang Ling said, "No matter how powerful Li Yundong is, it's impossible for him to transform the Fox Zen school into a cultivation sect that can stand side by side with us. Because the Fox Zen school has been notorious for thousands of years, this is no longer something that can be reversed by individual strength. But if Li Yundong creates his own sect, hey, I dare say that he will definitely become a great master and become our great enemy. Although Zhou Ping had heard Zhang Ling's comments on Li Yundong more or less, this was the first time she had heard her master praise this cultivator who had a deep grudge against their Zhini school. Zhou Ping opened her mouth wide and wanted to refute, but she didn't know how to say it. After a long time, she snorted and said, "Let's wait and see." After Li Yundong and the others returned to their home in Tiannan City, as soon as they entered the door, Li Yundong's face immediately fell. Someone had dared to steal the Medicine King tripod under his nose. This really made him feel like he had lost all face. When the little foxes at home saw Li Yundong and the others coming back, they also surrounded them curiously. They were about to chatter and ask about the auction, but they saw that Li Yundong's face was as dark as a dark cloud, as if thunder would break out at any time. All of a sudden, none of them dared to speak and hid to the side in a low voice. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, immediately bent her knees and was about to kneel down to admit her mistake. Li Yundong immediately stopped her with his hand and said in a deep voice, "Zhou Qin, as I said, this matter is not your fault, but mine." As he said this, Li Yundong turned his face and said to Ao Wushuang, "Senior Ao Wushuang, you said that you know who took the Medicine King tripod? Who is it?" Ao Wushuang hesitated for a moment and said, "I'm not sure, but according to my deduction, it's very likely that it's someone from Jinyan Tantrism." Someone from Jinyan Tantrism? Li Yundong was stunned. He quickly clapped his fists and said angrily, "Yes, it must be them. I think it's very likely to be Saionji Tsunekatsu. Did they steal the Medicine King tripod to lure me to Japan?" Ziyuan also nodded slightly and said, "It's very possible. From a logical point of view, it makes sense." Moreover, before and after that, Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki were nowhere to be seen. Zhou Qin had been holding back her anger before, and at this time, she couldn't help but shout angrily, "Master, let's go and burn this Mount Koya." Ziyuan burst into laughter in horror and shook her head repeatedly. "No, no. Zhou Qin, don't be impulsive. Mount Koya is not a place for fun. In Japan, the status of Mount Koya in the Japanese cultivation world is equivalent to that of Taoism in Mount Longhu and Buddhism in Mount Wutai. You can't act recklessly. Otherwise, you will go in standing and come out horizontally." Zhou Qin said angrily, "Then are we just going to swallow this anger?" As she said this, she turned to Chris and said, "Chris, you judge. If it were you, would you be able to swallow this anger?" Seeing that the group of people were excited, Chris felt that she was an outsider, so she didn't dare to say anything. She just forced a smile and didn't say anything. Seeing that she couldn't get any help from Chris, Zhou Qin turned to Su Chan and said, "Su Chan, what do you think?" Su Chan blinked her eyes and looked at Li Yundong. Her eyes seemed to be saying, "I'll listen to Yundong. I'll do what he says." At this time, everyone's eyes were on Li Yundong. Li Yundong's face was gloomy. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw a letter slowly floating in from outside the balcony. "Hey, there's a letter." Su Chan also quickly found it. She shouted curiously. The letter slowly floated down on the tea table in the living room as if someone was holding it. Everyone took a look and saw that the envelope was exactly the same as the challenge sent by Saionji Tsunekatsu last time. The paper was full of cherry blossoms. Zhou Qin walked to the tea table in 3 steps, picked up the envelope, and handed it to Li Yundong with a sneer. "Master, I bet this must be another challenge." Li Yundong calmly took out the letter. After reading a few lines, he flew into a rage. He suddenly crumpled the letter into a ball and shouted angrily, "The Japanese have gone too far. How dare they use such despicable means? Do they really think I'm weak and easy to bully?" Seeing this, Ziyuan squatted down and picked up the ball of paper. As soon as she spread out the letter, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Ao Wushuang, and the little foxes also came over curiously. They saw that the handwriting on the letter was domineering, and the words were full of pride. The letter read, Li Yundong, I've long heard of your reputation as a great Jinren, but I haven't seen you for a long time. I had to take the risk and come up with this plan to see the true face of Jinren Li. However, I did not expect that none of the Chinese cultivators in the hall would be able to stop me in the slightest. Apart from being shocked, I am greatly disappointed. I can't imagine that the cultivation world of China, which was a country of 10,000 countries, was actually so incompetent. Although I'm the young monk of Regoino, I feel deeply ashamed of the cultivation world of your country. I've been begging Jinren Li for a long time, but I can't get him. Is that the reason? If Jinren Li feels that there is no hope of winning, you can say it frankly. Reputation is just a worldly possession. Why do you care? If Jinren Li still has a bit of courage, you can go to Mount Koya in 7 days to retrieve the Medicine King tripod of your Chinese cultivation world. No matter who wins or loses, I will return the Medicine King tripod to Jinren Li. But if Jinren Li is too timid to come, then this Medicine King tripod will be a powerful magical weapon of our Yamato people. When everyone saw this, they immediately became angry and became bold. This was not a challenge, it was clearly a provocation. Chapter 618. Before Su Chan and Zhou Qin finished reading, they immediately shouted in anger. Su Chan said angrily, "This Japanese guy is so arrogant. Yundong, you must teach them a good lesson." Zhou Qin was so angry that her 2 willowy eyebrows stood up. B** starred. It's too hateful. How dare he look down on me like this? Although Zi Yuan's eyes were full of anger, she quickly calmed down and said to Li Yundong, this is a provocation. Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, don't I know that this Japanese guy is provoking me? Hey, he wants me to go so much. Fine. I'll do as he wishes. With that, Li Yundong turned his head and shouted at Su Chan, go get a pen and paper. Su Chan immediately responded, turned her head, and rushed into the room. After a while, she ran out quickly with the 4 treasures of the study, ink, paper, and inkstone. Li Yundong turned to Zi Yuan and said, Zi Yuan, you write it. Since they challenged me, well, write a challenge and give it back to them. Seeing this, Su Chan immediately ran to one side and said, Sister Zi Yuan, I'll help you grind the ink. Seeing that Li Yundong was angry at this time, Zi Yuan sighed softly and didn't try to persuade him anymore. She walked up gracefully, grabbed her sleeve with one hand, and held the brush with the other. She turned her head to look at Li Yundong and asked, what do you want to write? Li Yundong said angrily, write as you see fit. If I write it, it will definitely be full of swearing words. Zi Yuan couldn't help laughing. She shook her head and raised the brush to write, but when the tip of the brush fell on the white paper, she hesitated again. This kind of challenge could not be written randomly. It was very particular about the words and sentences. Moreover, when it was sent to the other side, it would definitely be recorded. Maybe it would become a historical material thousands of years later. If she didn't pay attention to her words, it would cause future generations to gossip about her. Zi Yuan was born to worry too much. Her habitual hesitation made Li Yundong, who was beside her, a little impatient. This reincarnated wisdom king, who was usually calm and composed and could not be moved by the wind, was indeed enraged by the aggressiveness of Jinyan tantrism again and again. Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan had been holding the brush for a long time. He walked over and unceremoniously snatched the brush from Zi Yuan's hand. He waved the brush and wrote 6 big words, if you want to fight, then let's fight. After Li Yundong finished writing, he didn't even look at it. He turned his head and said to Zi Yuan, why are you thinking so much? Since the other party was being polite, we should naturally reply politely. If the other party is arrogant and rude, are we supposed to be polite? Sometimes, you are so kind that there is no limit to your kindness. Wrap this letter in the simplest envelope and send it over. Zi Yuan saw that the words written by Li Yundong were crooked. It was really a kind of praise to describe them with the words, ghost drawing peach talisman. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, I'm not being polite to them. I'm just worried that I'll lose your face if I don't write it well. Besides, aren't you afraid that other sects will laugh at you for taking a simple envelope? Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, it's good that I didn't write it on toilet paper. If they annoy me, I'll write it on a piece of paper and send it to them one day. They only deserve to see this. Su Chan and Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. Ao Wushuang also shook her head and said with a smile, child's temper, nonsense, really nonsense. Zi Yuan looked like she wanted to laugh but was too embarrassed to do so. She looked at Li Yundong's crooked words and said, well, since you're happy, let's do it this way. But, are you sure you want to send these words over? At this time, Su Chan and Zhou Qin also came over to take a look curiously. Both of them were excellent women, so they were naturally very particular about the way of writing. They saw that Li Yundong's words were crooked, and the most important thing was that the first few words were long and thin. The last word, Zhan, had been written by Li Yundong like two words, Zhan and Gu. It looked strange and really unsightly. Su Chan couldn't help but burst into laughter, but soon she covered her mouth and looked at Li Yundong with a frightened and nervous face, for fear that he would blame her and spank her. The corners of Zhou Qin's mouth also curled up, as if she couldn't help laughing, but she quickly held it back. Her face was full of bitterness, hatred, and pain. Li Yundong naturally knew what his handwriting was like. He had been in a fit of anger just now, so how could he care so much? He hadn't expected to make a fool of himself on the spot. His face turned red and he glared at Zhou Qin. What's with your expression? Zhou Qin said with a sullen face, Master, these words of yours are so well written. They really reveal their true feelings from the bottom of their hearts. When people see them, they feel a wave of anger rushing towards them. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. Bullshit, bullshit. Are you praising me or scolding me? At this time, Su Chan, who had been holding back her laughter, finally couldn't help it. She burst out laughing, which immediately made Li Yundong glare at her. Your words are beautiful. You write it. Su Chan quickly shook her hands vigorously. No, no, my words are not suitable for such an angry body. Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, I'm also a roaring body. As he said this, he turned his head and glared at Zhou Qin. Come on, stop pretending. You write it. Your words are the most suitable. Just write these 6 words. Zhou Qin tried hard to hold back her laughter. She walked to the table, grabbed her sleeve with one hand, and picked up the brush with the other. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down, as if she wanted to cultivate her emotions. Zhou Qin raised her head and closed her eyes, silently reciting the provocation she had just seen. When she opened her eyes again, they were full of anger. She quickly picked up the brush and wrote 6 murderous words. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Everyone saw that these 6 words were full of killing intent. They were really vertical and horizontal like spears and swords, and the momentum between the lines was majestic. They immediately cheered. Even Chris, an American who didn't understand grass, couldn't help but feel a fierce murderous aura coming towards her, which made her hair stand on end. Li Yundong looked at these 6 words and nodded repeatedly. He said with great satisfaction, well, just like that. Send it over. Su Chan asked curiously, Yundong, can't you just go directly? Why do you have to send someone over? At this time, Zi Yuan said with a smile, that won't do. This is the rule between sections. Although the other party is rude, this kind of etiquette rule can't be abolished. Li Yundong laughed and said, I don't care about these bullshit rules. I just want to reciprocate. It would be impolite of me not to reciprocate. If they dare to provoke me, I will provoke them 100 times more. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up when she heard this. She asked, Master, let me send it. Li Yundong glanced at her and said, "You?" Zhou Qin chuckled and said, "Zi Yuan is the future leader of the Linggong sect, and the other party is not the leader. Therefore, according to the principle of reciprocity, Zi Yuan can't go. Otherwise, it would be a favor to them." Su Chan asked curiously, "What about me?" Before Zhou Qin could speak, Li Yundong shook his head and said, "You? You can't. I don't trust you." Su Chan's mouth suddenly pouted, and she looked unhappy. Li Yundong had to explain, "It's not that I don't trust you, I just think that your character and strength are not suitable for this matter. You are right, not right. Do you understand?" "Oh," Su Chan said, pouted, and stopped talking. Zhou Qin looked at Ao Wushuang again. Ao Wushuang was a smart person. When she saw Zhou Qin's expression, she knew that she wanted to go, so she took the initiative to say with a smile, "I'm even more unsuitable to go. The Japanese cultivation world is one of the mortal enemies of our Fox Zen school. I'm a fox spirit, and more than 10 years ago, I had some conflicts with the Japanese cultivators of various sects in Japan. If I go there, I'm afraid I won't be able to return." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Why did you say that? How did the Japanese cultivation world become one of the mortal enemies of the Fox Zen school?" Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said with some emotion, "Back then, when the mystical silver fox was practicing the 9th phase of the heavenly Jin Dan technique, she provoked the divine tribulation. At this time, the cultivation world of various sects took the opportunity to besiege her and break her 3 souls and 7 spirits. In order to protect herself, the mystical silver fox threw the life soul of the 3 souls, as well as the 3 souls of the 7 souls, Tianchong, Linghui, and Central Center, into the 6 paths of reincarnation. At the same time, she transformed the earth soul, the spirit soul, and the power soul into the body of an ordinary fox and fled into the deep mountains and forests. In addition, the rest of her spiritual energy and her memory merged into the remaining heaven soul, essence soul, and heroic soul, and fled all the way to the east. After the mystical silver fox fled to Japan, she lurked beside the ruler of Japan at that time, Emperor Nyoyu, in an attempt to recuperate and make a comeback. But what she didn't expect was that there was a very powerful cultivator next to Emperor Nyoyu who discovered her true body. Li Yundong was a little stunned. He couldn't help asking, "Wait. Did the mystical silver fox hide in Japan at that time?" Ao Wushuang nodded. "That's right." Li Yundong asked in surprise, "At that time, did the mystical silver fox still change her name to Tamamo no Mei?" Ao Wushuang nodded slowly. "Yes. Tamamo no Mei was a famous 9-tailed celestial fox in the Japanese cultivation world and even in myths and legends. As for her origin, the Japanese cultivation world unanimously believed that she was a fox demon from China, and then fled to Japan from China. But some people said that she originated from India, but where exactly did she come from was unknown. Although Zhou Qin hadn't cultivated for long and didn't know much about the cultivation world, she was still clear about such a famous mythical figure as Tamamo no Mei. Zhou Qin asked in shock, "That's not right. I know that Tamamo no Mei is a 9-tailed celestial fox, but didn't she sneak back to Japan in the Tang dynasty on the ship of the Japanese envoy?" Ao Wushuang sneered. "It's the same excuse as the Zheni school and the Jinshan sect. It's just a whitewash. At that time, the imperial palace of Japan was full of masters, but they accidentally let a fox demon sneak in and lurk around the emperor. What a great shame and humiliation it was. If it weren't for the serious illness of the emperor of Bird Feather at that time, which made others suspicious, they wouldn't have been able to find the location of the mystical silver fox in another 100 years. Zhou Qin said strangely, "But, that's not right. The mystical silver fox followed Ji Bei into the imperial palace. Isn't that shameful?" Ao Wushuang said with a smile, "At that time, the envoys of the Tang dynasty were extremely respected people. Whether it was Ji Bei or the famous Abe Nakamaro in history, they would be greatly respected when they returned to their country. They had the special treatment of not kneeling when they saw the emperor and not being polite when they saw the princes. At that time, Japan's desire and worship for the culture of the Tang dynasty were crazy and unreasonable. The Japanese once thought that as long as it came from the Tang dynasty, it must be good. Therefore, the people around these envoys of the Tang dynasty would not be investigated. Besides, at that time, the envoys of the Tang dynasty brought back many cultivation magic arts from various sects in the cultivation world of the Tang dynasty. Even if the Japanese cultivators saw them at that time, they would respect them. How could they doubt them? Therefore, if the mystical silver fox really wanted to follow them into the imperial palace, it would be a piece of cake. As Ao Wushuang said this, he sneered and said, "It's a pity that their excuse is decent, but for the discerning people in the cultivation world, it's full of loopholes." Ji Bei returned to China during the period of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty, but in that period, our Fox Zen school had not yet been established. Guangong fought Qin Xiong. Humph, what a joke. Only then did Zhou Qin understand. I see. The one who appeared the mystical silver fox. Is it Abe Yasuo? Ao Wushuang's face suddenly darkened. Yes. The Abe family is the sworn enemy of our Fox Zen school. At that time, it was the Yinyang master Abe Taiching who sealed the soul and spirit of the mystical silver fox in a huge rock. As she said this, Ao Wushuang turned to Li Yundong and said very seriously, "Leader, if you really go to Mount Koya, you must pay attention to the Yinyang master of the Abe family. This is one of the oldest cultivation families in the Japanese cultivation world. It is extremely powerful. You must be careful." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Yinyang master?" Their Yinyang skills were passed down from the 100 schools of thought in the spring and autumn warring states period. I'd like to meet them if I have the chance. As Li Yundong said this, he turned to Zhou Qin and said, "Now it seems that it's indeed the best for you to go. But you have to be careful. Try not to mention our Fox Zen school and pick on their shortcomings. Of course, it's best to put down the letter and leave. There's no need to talk nonsense with them. It's useless to talk to them. If you talk too much, they will think you're afraid. I think the best way to deal with them is still the same word, fight." Seeing that Li Yundong had agreed to go to Mount Koya, Zhou Qin was overjoyed. She nodded heavily and said, "Master, don't worry. I won't let you down." After that, she sneered in her heart and said, "Japanese, just wait and see. My master is magnanimous and won't let me scold people. Humph, I don't have such a good temper. If I don't scold you, I'll take your surname." I suddenly remembered that in chapter 614, a friend pointed out that there was a bug in it. Rongwa didn't buy the ivory Arhat Tower, but I made a mistake at that time and wrote that he had bought the ivory tower. Later, after being pointed out by a friend, I have changed it. I hereby sincerely apologize to all of you. I will pay more attention to it in the future. In addition, thank you for the 800 VIP tickets Sword Finger Dongwu generously gave me. I thank you very much. Chapter 619. Early in the morning the next day, Zhou Qin went out early. Because she was going deep into the tiger's den and setting foot in another cultivation world, Zhou Qin had made all the preparations and homework that night. For her safety, Li Jiandong gave the colorful brocade bag and the lyoha to Zhou Qin and asked her to take them with her. Bubble. Book. Okay. In order to emphasize her official background, Zhou Qin did not fly to Mount Koya all the way with her young spirit body. Instead, she chose to take a train to Shanghai first, and then take a plane to Osaka. Mount Koya was located in Koya Town, Edo County, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. After arriving in Osaka by plane, Zhou Qin took a train to Mount Koya, and finally took a cable car up the mountain. Because it was the transition between late winter and early spring, there was a heavy snow in Edo County. The white snow decorated Mount Koya with silver. In addition, the geographical location of Mount Koya was relatively high, and the temperature on the mountain was more than 10 degrees lower than that on the flat ground, which was particularly cold. Because of such heavy snow, Mount Koya had been closed early. When Zhou Qin went up the mountain, she found that there were few people in the huge Mount Koya. Only a few monks in brown monk robes and yellow bamboo hats were walking slowly at the foot of Mount Koya. Zhou Qin looked at them and saw that these people were holding heavy vajra pestles. Although the weather was cold, they were all barefoot and wearing straw sandals, walking in the snow. The vajra in the hands of these monks was surprisingly long, about 1.6 meters high. There was a copper ring hanging on one end of the vajra. Every time the monk took a step, the copper ring on the vajra would make a fixed crisp sound. This sound echoed in the empty and gloomy Mount Koya, which was particularly ethereal and mysterious. These monks were like monks patrolling the mountain. When they saw Zhou Qin at a glance, they walked straight over. The leading monk formed a palm with one hand, saluted, and said a few words in Japanese. Zhou Qin's English was excellent, but she couldn't understand Japanese. She looked reserved and said in Chinese with a hint of sarcasm, "I have something to ask your Lord Masako Tachibana." The leading monk was stunned for a moment, as if he hadn't expected that the woman in front of him was not a Japanese. He turned his head and glanced at a monk behind him. Then, a monk looked at Zhou Qin strangely. He stepped forward, leaning on the vajra pestle in one hand and saluted with the other. He said in standard Chinese, "Benefactor, I think you are mistaken. There is no Masako Tachibana here. Moreover, everyone is equal in front of Buddha. How can there be such a thing as an adult or a lowly person?" Japanese Buddhism originated in China and was deeply influenced by Chinese Buddhism. Most of the scriptures collected in many Japanese temples were original works in Chinese, and some of them even had bilingual translations in Chinese and Japanese. In the past, if one wanted to become a real eminent monk in Japan, it was impossible not to know Chinese. In addition, Mount Koya was a famous tourist attraction. Every year, a large number of Chinese tourists came to enjoy it, so there were many monks in the temple who were good at Chinese. Zhou Qin even felt that the Japanese monks' Chinese was more fluent than many Chinese people's. However, the other party actually denied the existence of Masako Tachibana. Zhou Qin couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She asked, "Aren't you monks from Kongabuji Temple?" The monk smiled and said, "This is Kongabuji Temple, and we are all monks here. But today, because of the heavy snow, Mount Koya has been closed. If you want to go sightseeing, I'm afraid you will be disappointed today." Only then did Zhou Qin understand that because she had restrained her qi all the way here, the other party had regarded her as an ordinary person, so he wanted to ask her to leave. Zhou Qin smiled slightly. She glanced at the vajra pestle in the monk's hand and said, "How long is the vajra pestle in your hand?" 16 fingers. 20 fingers. One end of your vajra pestle is in the shape of a ring drum, and the other end is in the shape of a triangular point. In the middle of the vajra pestle, there are 3 Buddha statues as handles. One Buddha statue is smiling, one is angry, and the other is scolding. Hey, if I'm not mistaken, this should be the vajra pestle that is specially used to subdue demons and defend the Tao, right? The monk looked surprised. He looked at Zhou Qin carefully and asked in confusion, "How do you know this?" Zhou Qin laughed. She touched her waist with her hand, and a silver light flashed quickly in front of her. Chiwa instantly appeared in front of her and floated in the air. Under the reflection of the pure white snow, this chainsaw vajra chakram appeared particularly stunning. Its entire body was emitting a dazzling silver light, and the exquisite patterns engraved on its surface were surging with waves of silver ripples, looking magnificent and magnificent. Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Because I also have such a treasure to subdue demons and defend the Tao." Only then did the monk realize that the other party was also a cultivator. His face suddenly changed, and he asked in a deep voice, "Who the hell are you?" The other monks around the monk also slowly dispersed with vigilant expressions. They quietly surrounded Zhou Qin in the middle, eyeing her covetously. Zhou Qin knew that she was alone and weak, so she definitely couldn't fight with them. After all, this was the Xinyan Tantrism, and it was not a place to play. If she fought with them, she would not only humiliate herself, but the most embarrassing thing was that Li Jiandong would also come to save her. That would be a great shame. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and waved her hand. Chiwa instantly flew into the colorful brocade pouch around her waist. She said with a smile, "My name is Zhou Qin. I want to see your goddess, Masako Tachibana." The monk's face was as dark as water. He said, "How can you see Masako Tachibana whenever you want?" Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. "Just now, you said that everyone is equal in front of Buddha, but now you keep saying that Masako Tachibana is long and Masako Tachibana is short. Since everyone is equal, why can't I see her?" The monk's face changed. He put the Vajra in his hand on the snow and shouted coldly, "What a sharp-tongued woman! Are you here to make trouble for us in Mount Koya?" The surrounding monks also stopped the Vajra in their hands. The ring-shaped copper rings at the top of the pestle collided with each other, making an ear-piercing bell sound. The surrounding air shook, revealing a sharp killing intent. Zhou Qin glanced at them and said with a sneer, "I think you've made a mistake. It's your Lord Masako Tachibana who begged to see me. It's not that I want to see her." As the head of the Masako family, although she was not a member of the Xinyan Tantrism, she was the great minister of the Xinyan Tantrism. Moreover, the Masako family had a very close relationship with the great monks of all generations. Although strictly speaking, the people of the Masako family were not cultivators of the Xinyan Tantrism, they were women who held great power and were highly respected in the Xinyan Tantrism. In Japan, a world where men were superior to women and the upper and lower classes were extremely strict, the Masako family was a rare power and strength among Japanese women. Even after the Masako family and the great monks of Mount Koya merged for several generations, the cultivators of the Xinyan Tantrism had begun to respect and worship the people of the Masako family as the guardians of the Xinyan Tantrism. When the monk heard Zhou Qin's words, he was immediately furious and shouted, "How dare you! How dare you be disrespectful to Masako Tachibana!" He raised the Vajra in his hand, pointed to the foot of the mountain, and shouted, "Please leave immediately, or don't blame us for being rude." Zhou Qin was not angry, but laughed. She glanced at the monk and sneered, "You want me to leave? Well, don't regret it later." With that, she turned her head and left. When the other monks saw her leave, they did not stop her, but stared at her back vigilantly. When the monk who could speak Chinese saw Zhou Qin leave, he was stunned for a moment and looked suspicious. Soon, he turned his head and whispered a few words to the leading monk in Japanese. The leading monk thought for a moment. He whispered a few words to the monk who could speak Chinese. Soon, the monk who could speak Chinese shouted at Zhou Qin's figure, "Please wait a minute." Zhou Qin turned her face and sneered. "What's wrong?" The monk walked up to Zhou Qin and bowed, saying, "If you are really the guest of Masako Tachibana, please tell me your name." Zhou Qin smiled and turned around. "Go and tell Masako Tachibana that Li Jiandong, whom she wants to see, is here." The monk's face became more and more confused, but he did not dare to be careless. He turned around and whispered a few words to the leading monk, then quickly ran to the Kongabuji temple on the mountain. Zhou Qingying stood in the snow. After waiting for about 10 minutes, the monk rushed all the way over. He formed a palm with one hand, bowed respectfully, and said, "It turns out to be Zhenrenli. Please come in, come in." Zhou Qin saw that they thought of her as Li Jiandong, but she didn't say anything. She smiled and walked inside. After taking a few steps, she came to the entrance of Kongabuji Temple. There were yellow shrines in front of the gates on both sides, and there was a wooden bucket filled with water in the shrine. Zhou Qin walked up the stone steps at the entrance, only to see ancient trees towering into the sky on both sides. The shade of the trees was dense, as if she had entered another world. What surprised her most was that wherever she went, the two sides of the stone steps would automatically light up with a white light, like countless white paper lanterns hanging in the forest. Although it was daytime, Zhou Qin still felt a strong light shrouding her, giving her an inexplicable feeling, as if she was stepping into the temple fairyland. Just as Zhou Qin was about to take a step forward, she suddenly saw Li Jiandong standing not far away and looking at her with a smile, as if he had been waiting for her here for a long time. Zhou Qin was shocked and subconsciously shouted, "Master? Why are you here? When did you get here?" "You." Li Jiandong walked up to Zhou Qin with a gentle smile on his face. He said softly, "I was worried about you, so I followed you." Zhou Qin felt warm in her heart and said with a smile, "I'm fine. I have an official background. They don't dare to do anything to me. But Master, you are here now. Aren't you afraid that they will detain you?" Li Jiandong walked up to Zhou Qin, gently took her hand, and said with a smile, "Compared to myself, I am more concerned about your safety." Zhou Qin's heart suddenly started pounding. She couldn't believe that Li Jiandong would say such a thing to her at this time. Although Li Jiandong had shown her warmth and gentleness before, it was more under special circumstances. Although Zhou Qin could keenly sense that Li Jiandong did have a vague affection for her, he always stuck to that line and treated her with courtesy. The scene in front of her was a scene that Zhou Qin had repeatedly dreamed of night after night. It was a scene that she had been thinking about day and night. His arrival was so sudden and so surprising. Zhou Qin looked at Li Jiandong in a daze. Her heart was so happy that it seemed to explode, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. Li Jiandong seemed to know what Zhou Qin was thinking. He reached out to hold her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her fragrant lips. Zhou Qin only felt that her whole body was soft and hot. She subconsciously reached out her hand to block Li Jiandong's mouth and asked in a daze, "What about Su Chan?" However, Li Jiandong smiled slightly and said, "Actually, you are the one I love the most." Zhou Qin's whole body suddenly trembled. Her body, which had been trembling with excitement, gradually calmed down, and the ecstasy in her eyes slowly subsided. She pushed Li Yundong away, and her voice became a little cold. She said slowly, "The Li Yundong I know is the most affectionate and righteous man in the world. He would never say such a thing. Who the hell are you?" Chapter 620. Li Yundong, who was standing in front of Zhou Qin, looked at her in surprise. He took a step forward and reached out to pull her, saying, "I am your master. Don't you recognize me?" Zhou Qin immediately took a step back. Her voice was cold and full of grief and indignation. She shouted, "No, you are not Li Yundong. Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong, who was in front of Zhou Qin, looked more and more surprised. He said in surprise, "Are you crazy? You don't even recognize me?" Zhou Qin had a pair of deep, dark eyes. At this time, her eyes were full of tears, and there was a deep sadness in her dark pupils. She smiled bitterly and said, "No, you are not Li Yundong. The real Li Yundong would not talk to me like this. He is a gentleman, and he would never cross the line. You are not him, no matter how well you pretend to be him." Li Yundong, who was standing in front of Zhou Qin, sighed and said, "But isn't this what you dream of? Don't you dream about it every night? Don't you just want to be held gently by me?" Zhou Qin suddenly jumped up and said angrily, "Shut up. Who wants to be held by you? You are not him, you are not Li Yundong. You are just an illusion, my illusion. I am just under an illusion." Li Yundong let out a long sigh and said, "Whether it is an illusion or reality, the most important thing is that you are happy, isn't it? Why do people not want to live in a happy illusory world, but in a painful real world?" Zhou Qin raised her hand, and Chiwa instantly appeared in her palm. She smiled bitterly and said, "Of course you won't understand. Why would I want to live in the real world of pain and disappointment?" As she spoke, the chainsaw-toothed Vajra wheel spun rapidly. Its entire body was shrouded in a silver radiance. This radiance became more and more intense, and the speed at which the blazing moon spun also became faster and faster, producing an ear-piercing sound. Zhou Qin pointed at Li Yundong in front of her and said with a sad smile, "Because my master is still waiting for me to go back. I don't want him to worry about me." In an instant, Qi beside Zhou Qin rushed out like lightning and instantly tore Li Yunyang into pieces. The moment Zhou Qin saw Li Yundong being torn to pieces, she felt a sharp pain in her heart, almost piercing through her heart. There was nothing in the world more cruel than what was happening in front of her. After Zhou Qin saw that Li Yunyang had been torn into countless pieces by the Qiyue, the world around her suddenly shook violently. After a while, she saw that she had suddenly returned to the snowy land where she had gone up the mountain before, and her ears were still echoing with the sound of the bell of the subduing demon Vajra. The monks in front of her were still standing in front of her, maintaining the posture of holding the Vajra pestle in their hands. The copper rings at the top of the Vajra pestle were still colliding with each other. Only then did Zhou Qin understand. It turned out that when the monk in front of her shouted at her, "How dare you be rude to Masako Tachibana?" he paused for a moment, and the monks behind him also paused for a moment. At this moment, they released the illusion magic and made her fall into it. The subduing demon Vajra itself had the Buddhist magic power of breaking the inner demons of stupidity and delusion. In addition, the other party was unprepared, so Zhou Qin fell into the trap at once. Standing in front of Zhou Qin, the anger on the face of the monk who could speak Chinese dissipated a little. He shouted, "How dare a guy who is trapped in the sea of love come to Mount Koya to be presumptuous? Let's go. Masako Tachibana won't see people like you." Zhou Qin lowered her head, her body trembling slightly, and she didn't say a word. After a long time, she slowly touched the colorful brocade pouch around her waist. Zhou Qin slowly opened the colorful brocade pouch and took out the Vulcan's whip, Qiyue, and Liuhe one by one. She held the Vulcan's whip in one hand, and the Qiyue was like a crescent moon guarding her left side. The Liuhe was buzzing and guarding her right side. It was divided into two into three, and soon it was divided into 7 Liuhe swords, which were exactly the same as the number of these monks. When the monk saw Zhou Qin's posture, he was shocked, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. He said in surprise, "Are you crazy? How dare you show off your powerful magical weapon in Mount Koya?" Zhou Qin seemed to turn a deaf ear to his words. With tears in her eyes, she said slowly, "I have only loved one person in my life, and this person, although he is my master, although he does not love me, I still love him, respect him, regard him as a god, and respect him as a teacher. If it's possible, if he needs it, I won't hesitate even if I have to sacrifice my life." The Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand began to burn with a blazing flame from the handle of the whip, which continued to spread to the tip of the whip. She choked and said, "But you forced me to kill the person I love with my own hands. Although it was just an illusion, although it was just a dream. But you forced me to destroy the most beautiful thing in my heart. You forced me to kill my master. You, look for him. Die." "Really?" Zhou Qin suddenly raised her head, and her eyes were full of crazy anger. Her voice instantly became extremely angry and fierce. She swung the Vulcan's whip in her hand and smashed it heavily toward the monk in front of her. The monk saw that the Vulcan's whip was in front of him in the blink of an eye. It was so ferocious that it seemed to tear space and time apart. It produced a powerful suction force that almost made him unable to move. He took a deep breath and held the devil-subduing Vajra in his hand horizontally. Just as he was about to protect himself, a silver light suddenly flashed in front of him. In an instant, the devil-subduing Vajra in his hand was cut into 3 pieces by the Qiyue, and the 2 ends fell into the snow with a muffled thud. The monk was shocked and subconsciously retreated, but Zhou Qin's Vulcan's whip shook and wrapped around his ankle. Zhou Qin shook her wrist and threw him into the air like a sandbag. Zhou Qin's eyes were full of fire. She gritted her teeth and shouted angrily, "I'll let you use illusion magic." As she said this, the Vulcan's whip in her hand suddenly lashed at the monk who had been thrown into the air like a storm. Almost at the same time, when the monk's companions saw this scene, they immediately shouted and rushed up together. But as soon as they moved, the Ryoha arrived in an instant and turned into a ball of silver light, enveloping each of them. Without help, the monk who had been thrown into the air by Zhou Qin was instantly set on fire by the Vulcan's whip and turned into a burning fireball. After Zhou Qin slapped the monk fiercely, she threw him to the ground like a rag bag and then went to find trouble with the others. The other monks saw that every part of their companion's skin was unscathed by Zhou Qin. Although the flames all over his body had been extinguished after falling into the snow, he was now covered in smoke and motionless. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. The monk's cultivation was considered top-notch among them, but in the blink of an eye, he had been beaten to death by Zhou Qin. They were so shocked that they retreated one after another. One of the monks shouted in Japanese in panic, "Someone is breaking into the mountain. Someone is breaking into the mountain." Zhou Qin saw them shouting and scattering like birds and beasts. For a moment, she didn't know which one to chase. She angrily and unwillingly whipped the monk who had fallen to the ground again and spat fiercely. "That's what you get for using illusions." Zhou Qin's whip seemed to have brought the monk back to life again. He immediately let out a miserable howl, which echoed in Mount Koya for a while, arousing a flock of mountain birds. Then, there was a loud bell ringing in Mount Koya. A monk in a bright yellow robe and a bamboo hat stood at the entrance of Mount Koya and shouted in a dignified voice in Japanese, "Who dares to offend Mount Koya? Tell me your name." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhou Qin rushed in front of him like a bolt of lightning and shouted angrily, "A good dog doesn't stand in the way. Get out of my way." After that, the Vulcan's whip smashed the air and blasted in front of his face. The monk was shocked and subconsciously shrank his head. His bamboo hat was immediately blown away by the Vulcan's whip. It burned in mid-air and instantly turned into ashes. Zhou Qin kicked the monk and sent him flying. She didn't stop at all. She quickly went up the stone steps and rushed toward Mount Koya. Zhou Qin ran all the way up the mountain, but before she could run 200 meters, she saw many monks in monk robes rushing out of the mountain. Some of them were holding six-fingered Vajra pestles in their hands. They were pinching their fingers and chanting scriptures, blocking her way like a solid wall. Zhou Qin's eyes swept quickly and she sneered, "A bunch of idiots. Do I have to climb the stairs?" With a flick of the long whip in her hand, she threw it on the trunk of an ancient fir tree. She pulled hard with her hand, and her whole body flew up. In the blink of an eye, she rushed into the jungle. After Zhou Qin left the stone steps of the mountain road, her speed became even faster. Her body was like a spirit monkey. With a few leaps and jumps, she rushed to an extremely tall pagoda in Kongabuji Temple. At a glance, Zhou Qin saw that the red pagoda was 48 meters high and surrounded by 16 pillars. Each pillar was painted with a bodhisattva statue, symbolizing the gods of the esoteric mandala world. Zhou Qin knew that this was the fundamental tower of Kongabuji Temple, one of the core places of Mount Koya. She had already gone deep into the hinterland of Mount Koya. As soon as Zhou Qin landed at the foot of the tower, countless monks came like a tide. These monks roared at Zhou Qin angrily, like a fierce torrent. Although Zhou Qin had entered the primary phase of Jinshin, she did not dare to get entangled with so many people. Moreover, she did not know which of them had Yang spirit bodies and which of them had Jinshin bodies. With a wave of the Vulcan's whip in her hand, Zhou Qin tied a corner of the eaves of the fundamental tower and pulled herself to the eaves of the top of the tower, looking down at the monks below. Although some of these monks could fly, none of them dared to think that Zhou Qin would be so disrespectful. Therefore, they all pointed at Zhou Qin angrily and scolded her, or quickly chanted incantations and cast magic. At this time, a monk in a purple cassock slowly walked out from under the big tower. The monk's face was full of wrinkles, and he glared at Zhou Qin angrily. He quickly pinched a few fingers and recited a few very short and fast incantations. In an instant, Zhou Qin saw that the bodhisattva statues painted on the fundamental tower had all come to life. One by one, they pounced on her with angry eyes. Chapter 621. Zhou Qin saw that bodhisattvas and arhats quickly appeared on the tower one after another. These bodhisattva statues were surrounded by golden Buddhist power. Each of them was like a god, mighty and unstoppable. Under the tower was a sea of monks from Mount Koya. She was shocked and didn't even have the idea of fighting head-on. A thought flashed through her mind quickly: I've poked the hornet's nest. Under the tower, a monk in a purple cassock with 2 gray eyebrows shouted angrily at Zhou Qin in Chinese, "How dare you? Surrender now." However, Zhou Qin was stubborn and unwilling to admit defeat. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth, and the chainsaw Vajra wheel beside her crazily chopped at a statue in front of her. At the same time, the Lyoha beside her began to split crazily. In the blink of an eye, it split into countless Lyoha swords. The Bahuang and Lyoha swords were extremely powerful Taoist magic treasures. The Bahuang sword was best at one-on-one combat. Under the rotating iron lotus throne, it was almost invincible. The mother sword, the Lyoha sword, was best at one-on-one combat. The more people there were, the more powerful it was. Yan Fang had once held the Lyoha sword and fought against many people on Mount Gazao alone. She had beaten everyone to a pulp. At that time, she was only at the top level of Yang spirit. Now, the Lyoha sword was already Li Yundong's personal powerful magical weapon. Li Yundong had also entered the Jinshin phase, so the power of his personal powerful magical weapon had naturally risen. Therefore, although it was lent to Zhou Qin, the Lyoha sword was really a little terrifying in front of the vast sea of people. Although Mount Koya was the main mountain of Xinyan Tantrism, with a large number of cultivators and a deep foundation, not every cultivator was a master. There were even many monks among them who had not even reached the Zhuji phase. However, these monks who had not reached the Zhuji phase had to face the Lyoha sword, which was equivalent to the Jinshin phase. When the flying sword fell, they immediately cried for their parents. Zhou Qin saw that the Lyoha sword was divided, and there were immediately saber lights and sword shadows everywhere on the field. The bottom of the tower seemed to have become a sea of swords in an instant. Almost every monk was fighting with the Lyoha sword. Although some of the monks were so strong that they could definitely defeat the Lyoha in a one-on-one fight, because many monks were not strong enough, they had to divide their energy to protect them. Therefore, the two sides were in a deadlock. For a time, the field became a mess of thin porridge, and it was a mess. When the monk in the purple kasaya saw this scene, he was so angry that he blew his beard and glared at them. He shouted in Japanese, "Get into formation." When these monks with lower cultivation heard his shout, they quickly gathered together. Some were sitting, some were standing, and some were pinching their fingers as they chanted scriptures loudly. In an instant, a glittering magic array appeared around them. The magic array was surrounded by glittering Sanskrit characters, and the chanting of the monks shook the heavens and the earth, bringing with it a huge pressure like a landslide or tsunami. Each of these monks was relatively weak, but when they gathered together, it was as if countless small water droplets had gathered into mountains, rivers, and seas, forming an extremely powerful force. Even the Lyoha dared not move forward while surrounding them. In the cultivation world, no matter which sect cultivators were from, they basically had a common understanding that magic was easy to learn, but magic treasures were hard to find. Magic treasures were easy to find, but magic arrays were hard to find. The various magic arts of various sects represented the most basic power of the cultivation world and were the most fundamental embodiment of the difference between cultivators and mortals. A cultivator who did not know magic arts was embarrassed to say that he was a cultivator. Otherwise, what was the difference between him and ordinary people? Above magic arts, there were magic treasures. These magic treasures were all refined by cultivators with a lot of manpower and material resources. Compared with magic arts, magic treasures had the ability to fight alone, so their status in the cultivation world was above magic arts. Because of this, magic treasures were the things that every cultivator dreamed of the most. Even a powerful magic treasure could make an ordinary cultivator become a famous figure in the world. However, magic treasures were not omnipotent. When there was a dominant sect in the cultivation world, this cultivation sect would collect a large number of magic treasures and monopolize them. In order to fight against this situation, some smaller sects would turn to research the development of magic matrices. The most powerful thing about magic arrays was that they could gather everyone's strength together and exert the power of 1 + 1 was greater than 2. In the face of some exquisite and powerful magic arrays, even Jinxian masters did not dare to take the risk personally. At this time, Zhou Qin was entangled with the Arhat Bodhisattva of the fundamental tower with the Vulcan's whip and the Chiwa, while constantly observing the situation on the field. After she saw that these monks had formed a strange magic array, the Liuhe only dared to do some small-scale harassment and testing around, not daring to attack on a large scale. At this time, the powerful monks also freed up their hands and launched a fierce counterattack against the Liuhe in front of them. Even the monk in purple grabbed the Liuhe with one hand. He quickly bit his wrist, held a mouthful of blood, and was about to spit it at the Liuhe. The Liuhe had been broken by Li Yunyang twice in a row with the boy's Yuanyang blood. It was originally a psychic magic treasure, so how could it be hit a third time? In the blink of an eye, the Liuhe flying all over the sky disappeared in an instant and turned into a sword. It quickly returned to Zhou Qin's side and floated in the air, making waves of unreconciled buzzing sounds. It seemed to be frightened by the old monk in the purple cassock and did not dare to attack again for a while. Seeing this, Zhou Qin became more and more frightened. She did not dare to fight anymore. At the moment when the Chiwa split the Bodhisattva statue in front of her, she shook her wrist and the Vulcan's whip hit the trunk of the nearest ancient tree. She kicked her feet and quickly fled into the depths of the forest. When the monks under the pagoda saw Zhou Qin escaping, they all shouted and chased after her again. Unexpectedly, at this time, the Liuhe suddenly turned around and split into countless Liuhe swords in an instant. They stared at these monks covetously and eagerly. When the monks saw this, they were shocked. They immediately stopped in their tracks and quickly formed a formation to recite their scriptures. However, the Liuhe sword made a feint. After frightening these monks, it immediately turned into a sword and chased after Zhou Qin like lightning into the depths of the mountain. The monk in the purple cassock was furious and shouted, "Monks below the great monk capital, form a formation to protect themselves. The others, follow me." The monks of Xinyan Tantrism were divided into 16 levels, namely, teacher, lawyer, junior monk capital, little monk capital, middle monk capital, great monk capital, little monk capital, middle monk capital, great monk capital, little monk capital, middle monk capital, great monk capital, and great monk capital. There was more than one great monk of Xinyan Tantrism, so there was a supreme level above the great monk capital, which was the Dharma seal. Historically, if the great monk of Xinyan Tantrism wanted to inherit the position of Dharma seal, he must have amazing magical power and supreme virtue to be qualified to inherit. Among them, the teacher's trial was the lowest level, which was equivalent to the primary level of the first level of the 9 heavens of the Chinese cultivation world, molding body. The great monk capital mentioned by the monk in the purple cassock corresponded to the top level of the Yang spirit realm in the 9 heavens of the Chinese cultivation world. After these monks below the top level of the Yang spirit realm stayed in place to protect themselves, although the number of people chasing them had been reduced by more than half, the combat effectiveness of these monks had increased by more than one level. Zhou Qin saw that these monks were chasing after her. Almost every one of them was holding an 8-finger-long Vajra pestle in their hands. Each of them was strong and their eyes were like knives and swords. Just by looking at their faces, she knew that they were not to be trifled with. For a moment, she gritted her teeth in her heart. When there was no way out, she saw a relatively dark path in front of her. At the entrance of the path were 2 stone shrines full of classical Japanese characteristics. On both sides of the shrines, there were black banners with white characters. Zhou Qin had no time to look at them, so she rushed in. As soon as the monks chasing after her saw her rush in, they immediately stopped and turned to look at the monk in the purple cassock. When the monk in the purple cassock saw Zhou Qin rush into the Okanoin of Mount Koya, he immediately sneered and said, "What a reckless guy. We'll wait for her here. If she comes out, we'll catch her. If she goes inside, then she's already a dead person." Zhou Qin was in a panic and rushed into the Okanoin, the core hinterland of Mount Koya. At first, she didn't pay attention, but as she walked, she found that the light around her was getting dimmer and dimmer. Looking around, she saw that there were towering trees everywhere, and almost every one of them was a 1,000-year-old ancient fir tree that could only be embraced by several people. These ancient fir trees covered the place called Rigoino, which was respected by the Japanese cultivation world. The deeper they went, the less light could come in, as if this place had become another world isolated from the world. These ancient fir trees alone had already made this place feel gloomy and cold, but what made Zhou Qin feel even more creepy was that there were all kinds of tombstones on both sides of the stone steps. Each tombstone was engraved with a person's name, and almost all of them were in traditional Chinese characters. At a glance, Zhou Qin saw that there were some famous big shots: Oda Nobunaga, Takeda Shingen, Tokugawa Ieyasu, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and so on. When Zhou Qin saw this, she immediately complained in her heart, "Damn it, why did I come here?" Because she had seen the magic of Tachibana Wakako at the Taoist assembly, Zhou Qin had also read a lot of materials after going back and had a certain understanding of Jinyan Tantrism. When she saw this scene, she knew that she had gone to Rigoino in a panic. It could be said that Mount Koya was especially divided into Mount Koya and Rigoino. Outside Mount Koya were ordinary monks. Basically, the one with the highest cultivation was the young monk, who was qualified to wear a purple cassock. However, Rigoino was a place where eminent monks practiced hard. Only the strongest monks were qualified to enter. At this time, Zhou Qin saw that the surroundings were full of yin qi. The light was so dim that she could hardly see her fingers. There were tombstones everywhere on both sides of the stone steps. It was as if she had entered a world of death, and the air was extremely cold. Although there was no one here, Zhou Qin felt that there was a pair of eyes staring at her from every tombstone, which made her feel a chill in her heart. At this time, if it were anyone else, they might immediately turn around and leave this horrible and gloomy place. There were 100,000 tombstones in Rigoino that had been worshipped here for thousands of years. How could the yin qi gathered here be a joke? However, Zhou Qin was a stubborn person. She would never turn back until she hit the wall. She made up her mind, gritted her teeth, and walked inside. Along the way, the more Zhou Qin walked inside, the more spacious and gloomier she saw. After walking along the stone steps for hundreds of meters, Zhou Qin found that there was a Japanese-style hut on a relatively open land. The hut was black, and the eaves were arched. The roof was covered with black tiles. In front of the hut, there were 2 stone shrines. The shrines were dedicated to 2 gods, namely the immovable wisdom king and the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Not far from the door of this hut, there was an ancient well. A woman in a kimono and wooden clogs was standing in front of the ancient well, slowly fetching water. When Zhou Qin saw this woman, she was stunned. Who is this? Why is she here? Is she Masako Tachibana? Well, blue revolving shoes, you're amazing. You've been on the VIP list in one day. You're really good. Chapter 622. Zhou Qin looked at the woman with great vigilance, only to see that she was shaking a wooden wheel. The wooden wheel squeaked as it turned. As the wheel turned, a wooden barrel was pulled up little by little. But to Zhou Qin's surprise, there was no rope on the wooden wheel. But every time the woman turned the wooden wheel, the barrel in the ancient well would rise a little, as if there was an invisible rope hanging it. After the woman lifted a bucket of water, she turned around and walked back to the room behind her. However, there were 5 holes in the wooden barrel she was carrying. Along the way, almost all the water had leaked out. When she walked to a huge water tank on the side of the hut, the water in the bucket was almost completely leaked. She stood on her tiptoes, lifted the bucket and poured it into the huge water tank, but only a few drops of water were poured in. However, the woman didn't notice it at all. After pouring the water, she immediately carried the bucket back to the side of the ancient well, and then slowly began to draw water again. But what surprised Zhou Qin the most was that the soil under the water tank was wet. It was obvious that the water tank itself was also leaking. Seeing her repeating this action mechanically, Zhou Qin felt strange in her heart. She couldn't help thinking to herself, this water tank is as big as a person, and it's so thick that it would take several adult men to wrap their arms around it, but this woman can only draw a few drops of water at a time. Besides, the water tank itself is leaking. Even if a full bucket is poured in, it will leak clean. If I draw water like this, I'm afraid that I won't be able to fill the tank until the end of time. Zhou Qin watched quietly from the side for a long time. The woman seemed to not notice her existence and kept repeating this action. When Zhou Qin saw the woman repeat this action for the 50th time, she couldn't help but say, "Why don't you fix the water tank and the wooden barrel with 5 holes before you draw water?" When the woman heard Zhou Qin's words, she smiled slightly, turned her face, and looked at Zhou Qin with interest. She asked in very standard Chinese, "Why don't you get rid of all the hostility in your body and talk to me again?" Zhou Qin saw that the woman looked to be in her 30s, and her skin was smooth and snow-white. She frowned secretly and said, "How could I have hostility all over my body?" The woman smiled faintly and also fell down. "My wooden barrel is also intact." As she spoke, she slowly picked up another bucket of water. This wooden bucket was still leaking heavily. As she walked, the water leaked out completely. Zhou Qin pointed to the water stain under her feet and said, "Look, is it leaking?" The woman also pointed in the direction of Zhou Qin and said with a smile, "Look, aren't you full of hostility?" Zhou Qin was surprised and said unhappily, "I'm kind enough to remind you, but you're playing tricks with me. Do you think I don't understand what you're saying? If the monks at the foot of the mountain hadn't offended me first, why would I be so angry?" The woman smiled and said, "You're right. Everything has a cause and effect. But have you ever thought about why I'm constantly fetching water here?" Zhou Qin frowned and asked, "Did you make a mistake and get punished?" The woman smiled and said, "That's right, I made a big mistake, so I'm punished to use this bucket of 5 leeks to fetch water until the water jar is full." Zhou Qin said with some sympathy, "Ah, I thought you were Masako Tachibana, but I didn't expect that you weren't. Were you punished by Masako Tachibana to fetch water here?" The woman laughed and said, "Yes, you're so smart. You guessed it right." Zhou Qin saw that the woman was kind and polite. Although she was not very beautiful, her face was gentle, and there was a different kind of tranquility in her movements. The resentment in her heart gradually dissipated a lot. Zhou Qin said, "You are also very smart. At a glance, you know that I was chased up the mountain. Why didn't you catch me?" The woman smiled and shook her head. "I'm not interested in your business, but the hostility in you is obvious. Look, the souls here are all looking at you." As she said this, she pointed around. Zhou Qin looked around and saw that the tombstones were standing silently like a forest. There was no sign of a ghost. However, there was an incomparably huge pressure in this silent silence, which made her hair stand on end. Zhou Qin shivered secretly and asked, "I was forced to." "Forget it, let's not talk about this. I want to ask you, do you know where Masako Tachibana is? I want to see her." The woman stopped fetching water and looked at Zhou Qin carefully with interest. She asked, "What do you want to see her for?" Zhou Qin said, "She sent a letter to my master a while ago. Now I'm sending a letter back." The woman laughed and said, "I see. I understand." She pointed to a deep and hidden path behind her and said, "Go from here and walk another 200 meters inside. You will see a wooden house. That's it. Masako Tachibana is there." Zhou Qin formed a palm with one hand and thanked her with Taoist etiquette. Then she walked all the way inside. Not long after she left, a little girl came out of the house. The girl was about 13 or 14 years old, with red lips and white teeth. She was very beautiful. It was Tachibana Wakako, who had participated in the Taoist assembly and been beaten to tears by Li Jiandong. Tachibana Wakako stepped on wooden clogs and ran to the woman with small steps. She asked curiously, "Grandma, why didn't you show her the wrong way? Why did you tell her where her mother lives?" Tachibana Wakako's grandmother lowered her head and smiled slightly. "Silly child, she has already gone the wrong way, but how can we let her go the wrong way again?" Tachibana Wakako blinked her eyes as if she understood. "But she is our enemy." Tachibana Wakako's grandmother laughed and said, "There are no eternal enemies, and there are no eternal friends. Tachibana Wakako, you have to remember this sentence." Tachibana Wakako pouted unhappily and said, "I don't want to be friends with them. They caused my mother to be scolded so badly by many people, and I was scolded so badly by my mother. I hate them so much." Tachibana Wakako's grandmother shook her head helplessly and said with a smile, "More than 10 years ago, I was very good friends with the masters of these people. Alas, I didn't expect it to become like this now. I really didn't expect it." Tachibana Wakako's eyes widened and she asked curiously, "Really, Grandma? I've never heard you say that. Who are these people that you are talking about? Are you referring to that hateful Li Jiandong?" Tachibana Wakako's grandmother stopped moving and raised her head, as if she was recalling something. She said slowly, "I'm talking about Li Jiandong's friend. That little girl named Zi Yuan, she has a very great master called Wang Yuanshan." When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she became interested. She supported herself with her hands and sat on the edge of the ancient well. Her legs, which were wearing white horizontal cotton socks, were kicking. She asked with a smile, "Grandma, is this Wang Yuanshan your lover?" Tachibana Wakako's grandmother couldn't help laughing. She looked at Tachibana Wakako reproachfully and said, "You are not allowed to be disrespectful to him." She didn't continue the topic of Tachibana Wakako, but let out a long sigh and said, "When I went to Shiyuan Temple in Dongwu City, China, to worship the statue of Master Hongfa, I met him by accident. At that time." As Tachibana Wakako's grandmother spoke, she seemed to recall the scene of that year, and she couldn't help showing a gentle expression on her face. She said softly, "At that time, he followed me all the way out of Shiyuan Temple and followed me for a long time. At that time, I thought he was a lecher and wanted to drive him away. Unexpectedly, he suddenly told me that although the magic power all over my body looked powerful, it was actually vulnerable. At that time, I was proud and arrogant, so I was unwilling to believe him, so I asked him to a place to fight in private." Tachibana Wakako covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Grandma, did you lose?" Tachibana Wakako's grandmother laughed and said, "Yes, I lost miserably. It's really a memory that I can't bear to look back on." Tachibana Wakako suddenly remembered that before she had fought with Li Yundong, she had been really powerful and invincible. But when she had fought with Li Yundong, she had been slapped by his palm. She was so scared that she had lost any reaction and burst into tears. Tachibana Wakako suddenly became unhappy and said, "Yes, the last time I fought with Li Yundong, I also lost miserably. I even cried. It's shameful to think about it." Tachibana Wakako's grandmother laughed, touched Tachibana Wakako's black hair, and said with a smile, "In fact, when time slowly passes, when everything slowly settles down, you will find that these are actually nothing. They will all become your precious wealth." However, Tachibana Wakako said disapprovingly, "But I feel that I wish all of this had never happened. I don't even dare to see my mother now. I hide from her everywhere." Tachibana Wakako's grandmother smiled slightly and said, "So that's how it is. I was wondering why you hid here all day long to accompany me, an old woman." Tachibana Wakako giggled. She rolled her eyes, took her hand, and quickly changed the topic. Nonsense, my grandmother is not an old woman. She is young and beautiful. By the way, Grandma, what happened after you lost to Wang Yuanshan? Did you fall in love with him at first sight? The eyes of Tachibana Wakako's grandmother suddenly became extremely soft. She didn't comment and said softly, after I lost, I was convinced and wanted to take him as my teacher, but he insisted on not doing so. But when I asked him why he lost, he refused to tell me. So I kept pestering him and followed him for more than 2 months. As she spoke, she fell into that period of memories for a moment. The smile on her face became more and more gentle and sweet. After a long time, she said, it's a pity that he refused to accept me. Maybe it's because I'm the goddess of Regoino. But in the end, when I left, he handed me this barrel and said to me, when you use this barrel to fill a huge and leaky water tank, you will understand why you lost to me. Tachibana Wakako let out an ah and suddenly said, so that's how it is. Grandma, why have you been fetching water here for more than 10 years? But this barrel and tank are both leaky, so it's impossible to fill them up. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother sighed and said, yes, for the past 10 years, I've been using this bucket to fetch water, but I've never been able to fill the water tank. Not to mention filling it up, I can't even fill half of it. Alas. Tachibana Wakako pouted and said, Grandma, I think Wang Yuanshan is playing tricks on you. This is simply impossible. As she spoke, she jumped down from the edge of the well, picked up the barrel in her hand, held it in front of her eyes, and said, Grandma, look, if it wasn't for that sister, I wouldn't have paid attention to this barrel. There are so many holes in it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wow, there are 5 holes. There are also holes on the side, and the most important thing is that there are also 2 holes at the bottom. If you use this kind of wooden barrel to fetch water, of course, you can't get water. Tachibana Wakako said with a serious face, although I don't like that sister just now, she is right. Why don't you mend the 5 leaky bucket and the water tank? This sentence is very reasonable. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother smiled and said, where is the reason? Well, this morning, I saw on Weibo that there were children waiting for an update. I waited until after 5 o'clock. I was really ashamed. Although there were a lot of things to do and I was unable to explode, I felt that it was not good to let the readers wait for the update. I, Tang, sincerely apologize to all my readers, and to the reader who waited until 5:30 a.m. to be bitten by a mosquito. In the future, I will try my best to update a chapter in the morning or at noon and advance the update time. Even if there is a change, I will definitely tell the readers in advance in the previous chapter. This is my fault. I apologize again. There will be another update in a while, and the change will start from today. Chapter 623. Tachibana Wakako said innocently, mend the bucket and the water tank, and you can quickly fill the tank with water, and then you can go out. Isn't it uncomfortable to stay in this place all day? You've been here for more than 10 years. Tachibana Masako's grandmother laughed and said, it's been more than 10 years. Do you still care about this? Lord Yuanshan asked me to fetch water. He must be testing my willpower and endurance. He must think that my endurance and willpower in cultivation are not enough, so I will lose to him. Tachibana Wakako said angrily, nonsense. He must be playing tricks on you. How can there be such a test of willpower and endurance? There are 5 more holes in a wooden barrel. No matter how powerful he is, he can't fill a water tank. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother had been a goddess with a very high cultivation in Jinyan Tantrism. Her status was extremely high and she was highly respected. But because she had secretly lost to Wang Yuanshan more than 10 years ago, she had returned to the deep mountains of Regoino with a leaky wooden barrel and began to fetch water non-stop. Out of awe of her, others did not dare to ask, nor did they dare to say anything more. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees the game clearly. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother had been trapped in the mystery given to her by Wang Yuanshan for more than 10 years, and she had never jumped out to see this problem. At this time, Zhou Qin and Tachibana Wakako repeatedly asked this question at the same time. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother finally had an idea. She had subconsciously repeated the word 5-leak bucket with Zhou Qin's words, but she didn't pay attention at that time. At this time, she was stunned for a moment and murmured, 5 leaks? Why are there only 5 loopholes? She took the wooden barrel from Tachibana Wakako's hand and looked at it carefully. The more she looked at it, the more her eyes shone. Her voice gradually became excited and she said in a low voice, yes, didn't Buddha say that men have 7 treasures and women have 5 leaks? Do the 5 loopholes in this wooden barrel refer to the 5 loopholes in my body? Tachibana Wakako's grandmother was also a great cultivator. Although she was the goddess of Xinyan Tantrism, she had read the cultivation classics of various sects and schools since she was a child. She was very knowledgeable, but she got into a dead end for a while and couldn't turn around. At this time, she was inadvertently pointed out by someone, and she immediately pushed away the clouds and saw the bright moon. Buddhist cultivation was completely different from Taoist cultivation. In the beginning, Taoist cultivation was just like Buddhism. It only focused on cultivating one's life, which was to cultivate one's own spiritual world. It didn't pay attention to cultivating one's nature, which was to cultivate one's physical body. However, ever since Zhang Buduan advocated dual cultivation of life and body, in the Northern Song dynasty, almost all the Taoist sects accepted his view and began to cultivate their spirit and body at the same time. In the past, Zhang Buduan had made an appointment with a monk to travel around Yangzhou in the form of Yang spirit. After returning, the monk talked about the blooming of Qianghua in Yangzhou, but Zhang Buduan smiled and did not say anything. He took out a Qianghua from his sleeve. The monk was shocked. His Yang spirit could not touch things, but Zhang Buduan's Yang spirit could, so he broke a Qianghua and came back. The monk asked him why. Zhang Buduan said, you cultivate your life but not your nature, and I just cultivate my life and body. It was also for this reason that after the Northern Song dynasty, more and more Buddhist sects began to cultivate their life and body, but their cultivation methods and ideas were different. The magic and cultivation ideas of Xinyan Tantrism were passed down from the Tantrism of the Tang dynasty, so they also paid attention to cultivating life rather than nature. Moreover, for thousands of years, the ancient meaning school of Xinyan Tantrism had been entrenched in Mount Koya and had been fighting with the new meaning school. Although they were powerful, in order to emphasize the difference between their cultivation ideas and that of the new meaning school, they had always been self-restrained. In addition, the hierarchy in Japan was obvious, and the relationship between superiors and subordinates was extremely strict. All kinds of rules and systems were like steel and concrete blockhouses that were indestructible, and almost no one could shake them. This situation had led to the steady development of the Japanese cultivation world. It had a deep foundation and great power, but it also made it impossible for them to be like the Chinese cultivation world. Amazing talents emerged one after another, and there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers everywhere in the land of China. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother accidentally figured out this forbidden area of doubt that no one had tried to touch for thousands of years. She was ecstatic and said to herself, yes. It must be so. Only the Taoist cultivation sects in the world pay attention to repairing the 5 leakage body. He must have seen that I didn't repair the 5 leakage body, so he used this to warn me. This wooden barrel is referring to my 5 apertures body, and this large water jar is referring to my cultivation. Although the water tank is huge, due to the defects of the 5 leakage body, it can't be filled with water. No matter how much water I get, it will leak clean. Yes, that must be what Lord Yuanshan meant. Alas, when I saw this girl's hostility, I wanted to enlighten her according to her wishes, but I didn't expect that I would be enlightened by her instead. It's ridiculous, ridiculous. Tachibana Wakako's grandmother finally couldn't help but raise her head and laugh. I understand, Lord Yuanshan, so that's what you mean. I understand. She burst into laughter. Her voice penetrated the dark and gloomy Regoino and rushed straight into the sky, shaking Mount Koya so that her laughter echoed everywhere. The mountains shook and thousands of birds came out of the forest. Zhou Qin didn't know that her inadvertent words had actually enlightened a goddess of Xinyan Tantrism, who had been cultivating in seclusion. She didn't know what would happen after she enlightened Tachibana Wakako's grandmother. Zhou Qin walked all the way in the direction pointed by Tachibana Wakako's grandmother. Sure enough, after walking for 200 meters, she saw a black tile and white wall in front of her. Inside the wall was a maple tree. Although it was in the cold season between spring and winter, this maple tree had a fiery red leaf. Although it was beautiful, compared with the withering scene around it, it revealed a strange feeling. Zhou Qin glanced at the maple tree and walked along the stone road to the gate of the yard. After pushing the door open and entering, she saw a large wooden house in front of her, full of the style of Japanese architecture. There was no tombstone beside the wooden house, and bright red maple leaves were scattered on the ground, giving off a sense of tranquility and gloominess. Zhou Qin knew that she had entered the heart of Regoino Okuhara, where the goddess, Masako Tachibana, lived. Although she had always been bold and calm, at this time, her heart couldn't help beating violently. At this moment, a leisurely woman's voice came from the wooden house, also in very standard Chinese. Just now you were extremely bold, why are you as timid as a mouse now? Zhou Qin's heart trembled. She took a deep breath and quickly adjusted her mind. After stabilizing her emotions, she was neither humble nor arrogant, and walked inside unhurriedly. After walking up a few wooden stairs, she came to the door and saw a woman in a white witch costume with a red belt around her waist kneeling on the tatami, elegantly making tea. Next to her sat an old monk in a red and white cassock. The old monk had a solemn face and was holding a string of prayer beads in his hand. He was looking at his nose and his nose at his heart, chanting scriptures in a low voice. It seemed that he had turned a deaf ear to Zhou Qin's arrival. In front of the tatami, Zhou Qin was about to step forward. Masako Tachibana, who was wearing a white witch costume, did not raise her head and said slowly, "Please take off your shoes and come in." Zhou Qin saw that Masako Tachibana's appearance was almost the same as that of Tachibana Wakako. She was very beautiful. When she was making tea, her every move was worthy of the word elegant. Her whole body was flowing with elegant and artistic aura. At this moment, she seemed to be more like an elegant and beautiful tea lady than a famous goddess. When beauties met each other, there would always be sparks and waves in the dark, especially when the two beauties were hostile to each other. Zhou Qin saw that although Masako Tachibana was elegant and dignified, her tone of voice revealed a condescending aura, which made her feel very uncomfortable and her heart was full of knots. Zhou Qin frowned secretly. She didn't want to give in according to Masako Tachibana's words, so she stood at the door and said, "I just came to deliver a letter, and I don't need to go in." At this time, Masako Tachibana raised her head and looked at Zhou Qin leisurely. She smiled slightly and said, "Oh? Show me the letter." Zhou Qin also smiled slightly. She raised her hand and threw the letter in her hand at Masako Tachibana. The letter was controlled by her jinchi to fly in the air and quickly flew toward Masako Tachibana's face. Masako Tachibana raised her hand, and the letter stopped in front of her. She smiled and said, "Is this how you send letters? Is this your etiquette?" Zhou Qin also smiled and said, "This is how you sent letters at the beginning, so I will return it to you like this." Masako Tachibana frowned slightly and did not continue to pester Zhou Qin. She picked up the envelope and saw that it was the simplest ordinary envelope. There was no word on it, and it was not even sealed. It was not solemn at all. She could not help but frown deeper. When she opened the letter inside and glanced at it, she saw 6 murderous cursive characters leaping out of it. The murderous aura contained in these 6 characters was aggressive, like a longbow that was ready to be shot, like a sharp sword that would be unsheathed at any time. Even the red-robed monk beside him couldn't help opening his eyes slightly and glancing at the letter. But he just glanced at it and soon closed his eyes again. Masako Tachibana looked at the reply in front of her meaningfully and laughed. There was anger in her laughter. Good words, good momentum. He is indeed a master who defeated Tachibana Wakako. I really want to meet him right away. As she said this, she raised her head and said to Zhou Qin, who are you to him? Zhou Qin said, I'm his disciple. Masako Tachibana nodded and said, I see. After that, she continued to make tea leisurely, leaving Zhou Qin aside. Seeing that she didn't respond, Zhou Qin originally had a stomach full of words to say, but at this time, there was no place to vent them. She held her breath in her heart and said unhappily, since there's nothing else, I'll go back first. At this time, Masako Tachibana raised her head and looked at Zhou Qin in surprise. She said, are you leaving? At this time, Zhou Qin had already turned around and was about to leave. Hearing this, she also turned around and asked, why don't you leave? Masako Tachibana stared at Zhou Qin as if she were looking at an idiot. She said in surprise, you injured the monks of our Mount Koya, made a scene in Mount Koya, and broke into the Okwen without permission. How dare you want to leave? What do you think Mount Koya is? Zhou Qin's heart tightened, and her voice slowly became cold. She said in a deep voice, do you want to detain me? Masako Tachibana said lightly, you have to give us an explanation. Otherwise, if the matter gets out, what will others think of our Mount Koya? Zhou Qin sneered and said, it's you who are disrespectful and rude. Masako Tachibana also said coldly, then can you do such a cruel thing? Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows and was furious in her heart. What about the illusion that you forced me to kill my master? But at this time, Zhou Qin had calmed down. She knew that it was useless for her to say such words, so she swallowed them back. She sneered and said, if you want to detain me, it depends on whether you have the ability or not. Hearing her words, Masako Tachibana immediately burst out laughing. Her voice was full of disdain and sarcasm, as if she was mocking Zhou Qin for overestimating herself. Zhou Qin was proud and arrogant. How could she stand such ridicule? Her eyebrows were getting higher and higher, and her hands slowly touched the Vulcan's whip around her waist. However, Masako Tachibana seemed to not notice her movements. She still laughed unscrupulously and left the door wide open. Seeing that she was so arrogant, Zhou Qin was even more angry. After holding the handle of the Vulcan's whip in her hand, she was about to exert her strength when she suddenly heard a hurried shout from behind, stop, don't hit me. Chapter 624. When Zhou Qin and Masako Tachibana heard the voice, they couldn't help but look in the direction of the voice. They saw a woman in a cherry blossom kimono running over with small steps. It was the woman Zhou Qin had met before. When Masako Tachibana saw her, she was stunned and said in surprise, Mother? The red-robed monk, who had been chanting the scriptures in a low voice, also raised his head at this time. He opened his eyes in surprise and looked at the woman. He stood up and asked in astonishment, Tsuruko Tachibana, why did you come out? He saw that the melancholy that had been hidden between Tsuruko Tachibana's eyebrows had been swept away. Although his expression was a little anxious, there was a kind of great enlightenment in his eyes that, once you achieve the Tao, you can die without regret. The red-robed monk suddenly widened his eyes and asked, Tsuruko Tachibana, have you comprehended the Tao? After Tsuruko Tachibana walked quickly to the hut, she put her hands together in front of her, and spread her palms flat on the inside of her thighs. She bowed slightly to the red-robed monk and said respectfully, Master Kaisai Hikaryuni, we meet again. Long time no see. The 413th great monk of Jinyan Tantrism, Kaisai Hikaryuni, put his palms together and said with surprise and admiration, Amitba, Tsuruko Tachibana, I didn't expect you to really understand the great way. Congratulations. At this time, behind Tsuruko Tachibana, Tachibana Wakako also trotted over. She ran to the door, looked at Zhou Qin, and then at her mother, Masako Tachibana. When Masako Tachibana saw her at a glance, she frowned and glared at her sharply, as if asking, how did you disturb my mother? Tachibana Wakako secretly stuck out her tongue. How dare she speak? She immediately hid behind Tsuruko Tachibana and made a face at her mother. Her eyes were cunning and she argued, it's not me. It's grandma who wants to come. Masako Tachibana stood up, bowed respectfully to Tsuruko Tachibana, and said, Mother, congratulations on your enlightenment. But, why are you here? Tsuruko Tachibana also bowed politely to his daughter and said, I'm here to ask you for a favor. Masako Tachibana quickly glanced at Zhou Qin. She frowned and said unhappily in her heart, Mother, do you want to plead for her? Tsuruko Tachibana smiled and said, Yes, please agree. The relationship between the superiors and subordinates in Japan was strict. Although Tsuruko Tachibana was the mother of Masako Tachibana, because Masako Tachibana was the current minister of worship, the head of the Tachibana family and the goddess, and Tsuruko Tachibana was only the former head of the family and the former goddess. Therefore, although Tsuruko Tachibana was the mother of Masako Tachibana, her words revealed a sense of humility and respect. Masako Tachibana said angrily, Mother, don't you know that she injured the monk guarding the mountain, offended the fundamental tower, and offended the Okanoin? She has committed many unforgivable crimes. If I let her go like this, how am I going to explain it to the others? Do you know that if we do this, the other sects will gossip about us behind our backs? Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly. She took off her wooden clogs and walked up to the tatami with small steps. Then she knelt down and said softly, Masako Tachibana, I know what she did. But for my sake, please let her go. Masako Tachibana said angrily, Why? Tsuruko Tachibana glanced at Zhou Qin and said, Because she was the one who asked me to comprehend the Tao. Masako Tachibana's face was suddenly full of shock. She looked at Zhou Qin in disbelief and said, She is just a cultivator who has just entered the Jinshin phase. Can she give you advice? Mother, are you confused? Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly and said, Masako Tachibana, you are the one who is confused. Don't you know that sage Confucius has also been enlightened by children? Haven't you read the story of two children debating the Great Way? The Great Way is invisible, and the Great Sound is silent. It's not that whoever has a high cultivation must master the Great Way. Sometimes it's around us, but we haven't paid attention to it. If Zhou Qin hadn't broken in and inadvertently given me some advice, I'm afraid I would still be trapped in the mystery. Masako Tachibana glared at Zhou Qin unwillingly and said, But mother, she just said something inadvertently. Tsuruko Tachibana smiled and said, That's right. There was a sentence in the first chapter of Strange Tales from Liaozhai written by Pu Songling. I said it to you on your 10th birthday. Do you still remember it, Masako Tachibana? Masako Tachibana said without hesitation, I remember. At that time, you said, if you have the intention to do good, although good will not be rewarded, if you have no intention to do evil, although evil will not be punished. But what does this have to do with Zhou Qin's matter? Tsuruko Tachibana smiled and said, if you have the intention to do good, although good will not be rewarded. If you have no intention to do good, should you be rewarded? Although I didn't go out of the house just now, I also know what happened at the foot of the mountain. The monks who guarded the mountain were also at fault. If they hadn't used illusion to explore Zhou Qin's background and offended her, such a thing wouldn't have happened. This should be regarded as unintentional evil. Moreover, for the sake of her being just a messenger, Masako Tachibana, you'd better let her go. Masako Tachibana looked down at her mother in disbelief. She said in surprise, Mother, how could you plead for her like this for an outsider? She whipped the monks of our Mount Koya and tarnished the fundamental tower. Is this also an unintentional evil? Tsuruko Tachibana said, when the strong are chasing, the weak are seeking to protect themselves. How can they care so much? If you want to blame the elk for trampling a frog to death in a panic because a lion and tiger are chasing an elk, then I think there is a big problem with your way of cultivation. Masako Tachibana had been invincible in the past 10 years. Not only did she have a high prestige in the Jinyan Tantrism, but she also had a high prestige in the entire Japanese cultivation world. At this time, she was at the peak of her spirit. How could she listen to such words? She looked at her mother in shock and anger, and shouted angrily, "Mother! How dare you doubt my way of cultivation?" Seeing that her daughter's face had changed with anger, Tsuruko Tachibana sighed in her heart. She prostrated her upper body on the ground and said, "Masako Tachibana, if my words offend you, please forgive me. But I believe that after a few years, you will understand what I'm saying now." Masako Tachibana couldn't help laughing angrily. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, saw that they had been talking quickly in Japanese before. Although she couldn't understand what they were saying, she could roughly judge what they were saying by observing their expressions. Zhou Qin turned to Tsuruko Tachibana, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, "Are you pleading for me? If so, thank you very much, but no need. If she really has the ability to keep me here, let her try." Hearing her words, Masako Tachibana immediately turned her head, stared at her sharply, and shouted, "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like this again and again?" Masako Tachibana's fierce shout shook the surrounding air as if it was about to shatter like glass. The power was really fierce and terrifying. Zhou Qin's skin tightened, and then all the hair on her body seemed to explode. In an instant, all the hair on her body stood on end. For a moment, Zhou Qin was overwhelmed by Masako Tachibana's momentum and couldn't help but feel suffocated. But soon she reacted. Her eyebrows were raised and she was about to make a move. But at this time, Tachibana Wakako, who was beside her, quietly pulled her sleeve and shouted in Chinese, "Stupid sister, don't quarrel with my mother. She's fierce. Do you really want to be left here?" Zhou Qin knew that she was definitely no match for Masako Tachibana, but she couldn't get out of the situation for a while. At this time, when she heard Tachibana Wakako's words, she suddenly felt a chill in her heart and thought to herself, "Yes, if I am left here, what if Li Jiandong and this Masako Tachibana lose because of me?" Thinking of this, Zhou Qin's arrogance suddenly disappeared. She no longer spoke. She lowered her eyebrows and looked down, as if she had turned from a thorn into a docile lady in an instant. At this time, Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly and said, "Masako Tachibana, I know what you're thinking. You want to detain her. When you fight with Li Jiandong, you want to distract him and take advantage of him? When did our Mount Koya become so useless?" Masako Tachibana had heard Tsuruko Tachibana talk about Li Jiandong several times. She finally couldn't help but be furious. She turned her head and shouted at Tachibana Wakako, "Did you tell her these things?" Tachibana Wakako quickly waved her hands hard and said, No, I just told Grandma what I saw and heard when I went down the mountain." Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly and said, "It's not what Tachibana Wakako said. Don't think that I don't know anything because I haven't left there for more than 10 years. Masako Tachibana, I'm not so old that I'm dizzy." Masako Tachibana said angrily, "Will I take advantage of Li Jiandong? Mother, you have to have a limit if you look down on me. Do you think it's easy for me to support the ancient meaning school for more than 10 years? If I don't have an explanation for this matter, do you know how much trouble I will be in?" Tsuruko Tachibana looked at his daughter sympathetically and said, "I have figured out how to make up for the biggest flaw of our goddess's bloodline. Masako Tachibana, as long as you let her go, I will tell you the secret. If you don't let her go, then, on the day of the battle, you will lose." Masako Tachibana was furious. "I will lose? Mother, do you think I will lose?" At this time, Tsuruko Tachibana raised his head and looked at his daughter without giving in. He said seriously, "Yes, with your current state of mind, you will lose." Masako Tachibana was furious to the extreme. She laughed angrily and said, "Okay. For your sake, I'll let her go back. In a few days, I will defeat him in front of all the people in the Japanese cultivation world and let you know whether I will lose or not. In addition, I don't want to know your so-called secret, and I'm not interested in knowing it. I've been invincible in the world for the past 10 years, and I didn't rely on the skills of fetching water for more than 10 years. Tsuruko Tachibana sighed in her heart. She didn't want to argue with her daughter, so she just bent down again and said to Masako Tachibana respectfully, "In that case, thank you very much. I wish you victory." When Masako Tachibana heard her words, she felt that every word was harsh and heart-wrenching. She pointed to the door and said angrily, "Get out. All of you, get out." At this time, Tachibana Wakako pulled the corner of Zhou Qin's clothes in horror, indicating for her to follow her quickly. Zhou Qin also knew that this was not the time to play the hero. In addition, the roar of Masako Tachibana just now really made her feel a little afraid. Without saying a word, she turned around and left. Kaisai Hikariuni, who had been silent and reciting scriptures in a low voice, opened his eyes at this time and looked at Zhou Qin's back. He sighed softly and said in a low voice, "It's easy to let a tiger go back to the mountain, but it's difficult to catch a dragon in the sea." Amitba. When Masako Tachibana heard this, a fierce light flashed in her eyes. Zhou Qin quickly left Okunin. Seeing that she was accompanied by Tachibana Wakako, the monks who were going to arrest her stopped for a moment and just glared at her indignantly. After getting out of Mount Koya, Tachibana Wakako patted her chest and said with a frightened face, "I'll take you here. Go back by yourself. Don't make my mother angry like this next time. She's amazing. Go quickly, lest she regret it." Because of what had happened at the Taoist assembly, Zhou Qin had always had a bad impression of Tachibana Wakako. But at this time, she had escaped from the tiger's mouth and reduced Li Jiandong's worries. She was also secretly grateful. Zhou Qin smiled and was about to speak, but at this time, she suddenly saw a huge statue of a goddess suddenly appear on Mount Koya. This statue of the goddess was formed by the clouds in the sky. This woman was holding a sharp sword, and her face could vaguely be recognized as Masako Tachibana. She raised the long sword in her hand and suddenly chopped down. Tachibana Wakako suddenly exclaimed, "Oh no, Mom broke her promise. Run." Chapter 625. Masako Tachibana gathered the clouds into a fozhen and wanted to chase after Zhou Qin. But at this time, Tsuruko Tachibana stood at her feet and shouted, "Masako, don't. You can't be a goddess who goes back on her word. Is victory or defeat really that important to you?" When Masako Tachibana heard Tsuruko Tachibana's words, she was shocked. Masako was the nickname her mother had used to call her when she was a child. Masako Tachibana hesitated for a moment, but she remembered what the monk had said before. Soon, she gritted her teeth and chopped down with her sword. This sword blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It was as if an indomitable giant was brandishing an incomparably sharp sword, wanting to tear apart the sky and sever the earth. At this time, Tachibana Wakako also looked at the earth-shattering sword and couldn't help exclaiming, "Vajra wisdom sword? Mom! No!" Her mother and daughter pleaded for mercy at the same time. No matter how hard Masako Tachibana's heart was, she couldn't help but be shaken again. She let out an unwilling roar. Instead of slowing down, the long sword in her hand sped up and chopped down. Zhou Qin saw that the sword was coming fiercely, and the pressure was so terrible that she almost couldn't move. Even if she wanted to break through this kind of confinement, it was too late. She simply gritted her teeth and used the power of Jinshin to protect her whole body. She stood still and glared at the sword that was coming down on her face. With a loud bang, the sword cut Mount Koya as if there was a terrible earthquake. With a crack appeared on the ground, extending from the top of the mountain to Zhou Qin's feet. Masako Tachibana's fozhen glared at Zhou Qin in mid-air and shouted in a voice that shook the sky, "You have guts. If you had wanted to escape just now, you would have been a dead man. Go back and tell Li Jiandong that I will wait for him here and see how he will defeat me." After that, she waved her hand, and the sharp sword formed by the clouds suddenly disappeared. Not long after, the cracks on the ground also made a cracking sound and slowly gathered together, as if a scar was healing quickly. In the blink of an eye, it returned to its original state. Zhou Qin was shocked by this magical skill. It was not difficult to make a crack in Mount Koya, but it was really an incredible magical skill to quickly close it after making a crack. Zhou Qin couldn't figure out how the other party had done it for a while. Master. Is he really a match for Masako Tachibana? For the first time, Zhou Qin was seriously shaken by Li Jiandong. The strength of the enemy in front of her was obviously beyond her imagination. Seeing her mother stop at the critical moment, Tachibana 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 Tachibana, Tachibana Tachibana, Tachibana 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 also came down the mountain. Just as Tsuruko Tachibana kept urging him, Tsuruko Tachibana also came down the mountain at this time. He trotted all the way to Zhou Qin and bowed apologetically. I'm so rude. Please rest assured that Masako will do what she says. Then, she said to Tachibana Wakako beside her, Tachibana Wakako, you go back first. I'll give her a ride. Tachibana Wakako nodded obediently. I know. Grandma, you go and come back early. Tsuruko Tachibana smiled slightly, turned to Zhou Qin and said in Chinese, Miss Zhou Qin, do you mind talking with me? Zhou Qin knew that she had escaped by relying on the woman in front of her. Moreover, the woman was gentle and polite, so she said politely, of course not. Tsuruko Tachibana smiled softly. She walked forward with very small steps. She kept her head down, as if there was something she couldn't say in her chest. After a long time, she suddenly asked in a low voice, do you know Wang Yuanshan? Wang Yuanshan? Although Zhou Qin had not cultivated for a long time, this was a well-known name. She nodded and said, yes, why? You know him too. Tsuruko Tachibana smiled and told her about her acquaintance with him. Then, she asked with concern and hope, do you know where he is now? Zhou Qin's eyes flashed as she looked at Tsuruko Tachibana in front of her. Although she was a grandmother, her appearance was no different from that of a 30-year-old woman. She was not very beautiful, but her whole body revealed the unique gentleness of a Japanese woman. In particular, it was obvious that she, like herself, loved an unreachable man deeply. This made Zhou Qin feel a little sad for a while. She sighed softly and said, Wang Yuanshan. He has ascended and become an immortal. What? Tsuruko Tachibana trembled slightly and cried out in disbelief, is he dead? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, no, he just started another life in the immortal world. Tsuruko Tachibana's face was full of sadness and sorrow. She said in a low voice, yes, he must have a good life in the immortal world, very good. As she said this, she raised her head and looked at the vast sky. Her expression seemed to be about to smile, but the corners of her eyes were full of unconcealable sadness. She said, I really want to know what the immortal world is like. Zhou Qin said casually, when you are with the person you love, everywhere is the immortal world. Tsuruko Tachibana suddenly turned his head and looked at Zhou Qin in surprise, as if he couldn't believe that such a young and impulsive girl would say such a thing. After a while, she smiled sweetly and said, you're right. I believe that you will be happy in the future. Zhou Qin smiled bitterly. She didn't want to continue such a sensitive topic with a stranger, so she changed the topic and asked, why did you save me? Tsuruko Tachibana smiled slightly and said, because you inadvertently enlightened me. Without you, I might have continued to be trapped. As she said this, she told the whole story and then sighed with emotion, I really didn't expect that the simplest answer in the world has been in front of me for more than 10 years, but I have never seen it. Zhou Qin also seemed to understand something. She thought to herself, what a close call. I'm ashamed. If I hadn't said that casually, I'm afraid that things would have been difficult to resolve today. It's a small matter for me to be arrested, but it's a big matter if I get my master involved. It seems that I'd better be less impulsive in the future. But on second thought, Zhou Qin thought, however, Tsuruko Tachibana has comprehended the Great Way at this critical juncture. It can be said that the only defect of the goddess will be made up for by her. Masako Tachibana's cultivation method is higher than that of my master. If she also knows, won't my master lose? In this way, I hurt him more. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment and couldn't speak for a long time. Tsuruko Tachibana seemed to know what she was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't tell Masako." Zhou Qin asked suspiciously, "Why? Don't you want your daughter to win?" Tsuruko Tachibana sighed softly and said, "I once said, misfortune is a blessing in disguise, and misfortune is a blessing in disguise. Masako has been too smooth in the past 10 years. She seems to be very glorious, but in fact, she is facing an abyss and in danger. If she can learn from a failure, just like me, it's not a bad thing." Zhou Qin saw that the Japanese woman in front of her was not only well-cultured, but also sensible. Even if the sects were hostile to each other and dirty, she couldn't help but respect Tsuruko Tachibana. "If the whole Mount Koya thinks like you, that would be great." Tsuruko Tachibana smiled slightly and said helplessly, "I've already jumped out of the 3 realms and am no longer in the mortal world. I'm far away from fame and fortune, so I can naturally stay out of the world. But Masako Tachibana can't. There are too many things on her shoulders. She is also forced to do so." Zhou Qin snorted coldly and said, "Even so, can you use despicable means to steal our Medicine King tripod and threaten my master?" Tsuruko Tachibana was stunned. "What's going on?" Zhou Qin told him what had happened. Tsuruko Tachibana was stunned and frowned slightly. She whispered to herself, "How did Mount Koya become like this in the past 10 years? It shouldn't be." Tsuruko Tachibana said to Zhou Qin, "Anyway, I still ask you to tell your master Li Yundong that if he wins in the future, please show mercy. Masako Tachibana is just a person in Jianghu, and she can't help it." Zhou Qin let out a long sigh and said, "Then go back and ask your daughter. Ask her if she will show mercy if my master loses." This sentence stunned Tsuruko Tachibana. No one knew her daughter better than her mother. She smiled helplessly and said, "I see. Miss Zhou Qin, I'll send you here. I hope that the next time we meet, we won't make such a big fuss again." Zhou Qin nodded, thanked Tsuruko Tachibana again, and turned to leave Mount Koya. When Zhou Qin left, she did not choose to take any transportation. Instead, she chose to fly back to her home in Tiannan City. As soon as she got home, she saw the little foxes in the rooms surrounding the TV. Su Chan saw Zhou Qin at a glance and immediately laughed. "Sister Zhou Qin, you're back. How's it going? Has the letter been delivered?" Zhou Qin thought of her trip to Mount Koya. What had happened really made her sigh with emotion. She sighed softly and said, "It's a long story." Su Chan blinked her eyes in confusion. "If you can't explain it clearly in 1 sentence, then 2 or 3 sentences?" Zhou Qin didn't seem to want to talk about these things. She changed the topic and asked, "Where's master?" Su Chan's face suddenly showed a resentful expression. "He's in seclusion again. This time, even I'm not allowed to go with him. Before the big battle, it was better to sharpen the spear than not." Zhou Qin nodded and asked again, "What about Ziyuan?" Su Chan pointed in the direction of the door next door and said, "She's in her own room. Go find her." Zhou Qin knew that Wang Yuanshan was Ziyuan's master. Since she knew something about Wang Yuanshan, she should naturally tell Ziyuan. She didn't go through the front door. Instead, she jumped gently from the balcony of the back door to the balcony of Ziyuan's residence and entered the room. As soon as she entered the room, Zhou Qin saw Wan Hongling, who she hadn't seen for many days, sitting on the sofa in a daze, with tears in the corners of her eyes. Zhou Qin couldn't help but be stunned and asked, "Wan Hongling? What's wrong?" Chapter 626. When Wan Hongling heard Zhou Qin's voice, she immediately stood up. She quickly turned around and wiped her eyes. When she turned around, her face was already full of smiles. Zhou Qin, you're back. Have you seen my Shiji? Zhou Qin's heart was full of questions, but when she saw that Wan Hongling was unwilling to answer her question, she didn't want to pursue it any further. She said, no, I was just about to come to find her. Where have you been these days? Wan Hongling forced a smile and said, I went back to the Linggong sect. Zhou Qin asked curiously, what are you doing there? Wan Hongling hesitated for a moment and said hesitantly, nothing, I went back to find something. Zhou Qin stopped asking and said sensibly, well, I understand. Tell me when Ziyuan comes back. I have something to tell her. Wan Hongling smiled slightly. Just as she was about to speak, she heard the sound of a key at the door. Ziyuan pushed the door open and entered. Wan Hongling's eyes lit up and she said with a smile, Shiji, what a coincidence. We were just talking about you. Ziyuan was also stunned when she saw Wan Hongling. Although she had been furious at that time because Wan Hongling had used a trick to make Su Chan and Zhou Qin go to Mount Huangshan, it had been several days since the incident. Even if she was angry, Ziyuan's heart had dissipated a lot. She asked curiously, Hongling? You're back. Where have you been these days? Why didn't you say hello to me? Wan Hongling smiled and didn't answer her. Instead, she pointed to Zhou Qin and said, Zhou Qin has something to talk to you about. You guys talk. I'll go back to my room first. Ziyuan looked at Wan Hongling in confusion as she walked quickly into her room. Her ponytail was shaking in panic behind her head, as if she was avoiding her. She shook her head secretly and muttered in her heart, what is this girl doing? Ziyuan was puzzled. After thinking for a while, she stopped thinking about it. She smiled at Zhou Qin and said, Zhou Qin, have you sent a letter back? How was the journey? Did they make things difficult for you? Zhou Qin sighed softly and said, a lot of things happened. I don't know where to start. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, it's okay. Take your time. Zhou Qin sorted out her thoughts and told him everything that had happened when she went to Mount Koya. She only hid the content of the illusion that the monks of Mount Koya had used to test her. Ziyuan was fascinated, especially when Zhou Qin said that Masako Tachibana gathered Dharmakaya true god with clouds and split the earth with a sword. Even though she was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be a little moved. Ziyuan cried out involuntarily, this Masako Tachibana is so powerful. Using the heaven chi to break the earth chi, this is at least the thunder tribulation realm. Zhou Qin nodded with fear on her face and said, she is indeed very powerful. In front of her, I have a feeling that my hands and feet are tied. Even if we fight, my strength will be greatly reduced. Ziyuan pondered for a while and said, your trip is very valuable. At least you know that the goddess of Aoin is born with a huge flaw. Otherwise, Tsuruko Tachibana would not thank you so much. Zhou Qin asked curiously, has your master Wang Yuanshan ever mentioned to you about him and Tsuruko Tachibana? Ziyuan shook her head and said, I haven't heard my master mention it. If you hadn't mentioned it today, I wouldn't have known that these things had happened. However, I can roughly infer how you enlightened Tsuruko Tachibana. If I'm not wrong, your casual words must have inadvertently woken her up and made her understand that it was the wooden barrel that was leaking everywhere. With the body of 5 leaks to practice magic power, naturally, she would learn more and leak more. With that, Ziyuan smiled and said, the reason why the goddess is so powerful is that she can use her special physique and bloodline to be the same as the gods and use the power of the gods to defeat her opponents. However, they themselves were lacking in cultivation. How could it be possible for them to cultivate their nature and not their fate? It's like a person with 1 long leg and 1 short leg. Zhou Qin's face lit up with joy. You're right. I've thought about it before. Now hearing what you said, I'm even more relieved. In that case, Master should have a good chance of winning, right? Even Tsuruko Tachibana said that Master can win. However, Ziyuan shook her head and said, not necessarily. Zhou Qin was very anxious and hurriedly asked, why is that? Ziyuan sighed softly and said, knowing the weakness doesn't mean that you can defeat her. It's like knowing where the weakness of a giant is, but he is strong and skilled in martial arts. You can't get close to him and hit his weakness. What's the use? Zhou Qin was greatly disappointed. What should we do? How did your master Wang Yuanshan defeat Tsuruko Tachibana? Ziyuan thought for a moment and shook her head helplessly. I don't know. Zhou Qin bit her lip and said decisively, no, I have to tell Master about it immediately. Ziyuan immediately said, no. You can't say it. Zhou Qin's eyes widened. Why not? Ziyuan said with a serious face, now Li Jiandong is cultivating in seclusion. If you disturb him and tell him about this, although on the surface, it seems to be beneficial to Li Jiandong and let him know the shortcomings and flaws of Masako Tachibana, in fact, there is still no answer to how to attack this shortcoming and flaw. Then Li Jiandong's mind will definitely be shaken, and he will not be able to concentrate on the way of cultivation when he is in seclusion. Instead, he will spend unnecessary time thinking about how to find out the flaws of Masako Tachibana. Zhou Qin said anxiously, but the most important thing at present is to defeat Masako Tachibana. What's wrong with studying your opponent? However, Ziyuan laughed and said, Zhou Qin, you are wrong. Our only opponent will always be ourselves. The most important thing is to strengthen yourself. Studying your opponent will only lead you into a narrow dead end. Don't think that Masako Tachibana is the most terrible enemy in the world. Enemies were endless, and there would always be opponents who were stronger than you. Do you think that Mount Koya is the strongest religious force in Japan? You are wrong. Zhou Qin was shocked. Is there a force more powerful than Jinyin Tantrism? Ziyuan nodded and said with a smile, yes, as far as Buddhism is concerned, Jinyin Tantrism is only ranked second in Japan. The number one Buddhism force in Japan is the Pure Land sect. Zhou Qin was tongue-tied. Pure Land sect? Isn't this a branch of Buddhism in China? Ziyuan nodded slightly. Yes, the Pure Land sect is similar to Jinyin Tantrism. They are both schools of Buddhism in the Central Plains that took root in Japan. Moreover, what's different from Jinyin Tantrism is that the Pure Land sect is often active in the forefront of Japanese history. Even in the most active period of the Warring States period, the Wish Temple, the base camp of the Pure Land sect, even privately trained and stored a large number of monk soldiers. At that time, in order to win over the Pure Land sect, all kinds of political transactions and even marriages were carried out with it. Hearing this, Zhou Qin was stunned. Monks also get married? Ziyuan said with a smile, yes, some monks of the Pure Land sect can get married and have children. Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. Are there people who believe in these flowery monks? However, Ziyuan said, don't underestimate them. The monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect were famous all over the world. It was common for them to recite Buddhist scriptures and raise their sabers to kill people. Even a famous person like Takeda Shingen has to curry favor with them. After thousands of years, the power of the Pure Land sect has long penetrated into every corner of Japan. Zhou Qin sighed and said, when I met those monks in Mount Koya, I already felt that some of them were so strong that they were abnormal. But I didn't expect that there were cultivators in Japan who were even more abnormal than them. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, because there are too many schools of Jinyin Tantrism and it is too complicated, the ancient meaning school and the new meaning school often fight endlessly, so the organization of the sect is relatively loose. On the other hand, the Pure Land sect is much stricter. Moreover, this sect has been secretly training an extremely secretive troop of monk soldiers in the Wish Temple. This troop of monk soldiers has been preserved since the Warring States period. In the world of cultivation, there is no sect that has such a disciplined and aggressive cultivation army. Zhou Qin sighed and said, I've learned a lot. Fortunately, the place where the letter was sent this time was not the Wish Temple of the Pure Land sect. Zi Yuan laughed and said, however, if you think that the Pure Land sect is the most powerful cultivation sect in Japan, then you are wrong again. Zhou Qin was shocked. Is there a cultivation sect stronger than the Pure Land sect? Zi Yuan said, yes. The number one power in the cultivation world of Japan is neither the Jinyin Tantrism nor the Pure Land sect, but the national religion of Japan, the Shintoism. In Japan, almost all Japanese people believe in Shintoism. According to tradition, a few days after a Japanese child is born, he will be taken to the shrine by his parents to worship the gods of Shintoism. In Japan, there are 82,000 shrines. These shrines are the sites of Shintoism. There are 96 million Japanese who believe in Buddhism, and more than 100 million who believe in Shintoism. Although the difference in numbers is not big, because many people believe in Buddhism and Shintoism, the number of Shintoism believers is actually far more than that. Moreover, even the Masako Tachibana and Tsuruko Tachibana you met before, as well as the Tachibana Wakako who participated in the Taoist assembly, were actually the goddesses of Shintoism in the past. However, due to the exclusion and struggle of the factions, they finally chose to merge with the Jinyin Tantrism. Zhou Qin's hair stood on end when she heard this. She asked subconsciously, on the day of the battle, will the Pure Land sect and the Shintoism sect also go? Zi Yuan nodded slowly. That's right. That day is the day when all the major schools of Jinyin Tantrism are elected for the position of chief executive. This day is not only a big day for the Japanese cultivation world, but also a day that the people of Japan pay attention to. On this day, not only the Pure Land School, Jinyin Tantrism, Shintoism, and other cultivation sects in Japan, but also the other Fahua sect, Tiantai sect, Dharma characteristic sect, Yin-Yang sect, and other sects in Japan. Zhou Qin was speechless when she heard this. She had thought that Jinyin Tantrism was already a top sect in the cultivation world of Japan, but she didn't expect that there would always be strong people. Jinyin Tantrism was just the tip of the iceberg in the cultivation world of Japan. If a small country like Japan was like this, what about China? Zhou Qin couldn't help looking out of the window. For a moment, worry climbed up her brows. How many cultivation sects are hidden in the land of Shenzhou that I don't know? How many masters are hidden? Can he cope with the day when master fights with him? Chapter 627. While Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan were secretly worried about Li Yundong was in the final closed-door cultivation in Mount Tianlong. What is a Jinshin fighting method? What are the characteristics of a Jinshin fighting method? Why can't I always understand the trick of a Jinshin fighting method? These questions had always been lingering in Li Yundong's mind. Even if he was meditating in the secret room of the Fox Zen school, he still couldn't figure out the real answer. Li Yundong woke up from his deep meditation. He let out a long breath, and a stream of white qi sprayed on the wall in front of him like a sharp arrow, and then dispersed in all directions. Li Yundong sighed softly, and there was a hint of melancholy between his eyebrows. Today was the 6th day of his meditation, but he still couldn't figure out what a Jinshin fighting method was. This body can't do anything outside? What does this mean in a Jinshin fighting method? Li Yundong stood up and looked at the scattered white qi lingering on the wall in front of him. The words carved by the mystical silver fox with her fingers looked particularly mysterious and deep under the lingering qi mist. Li Yundong looked at the heavenly Jin Dan technique and stared at the content of the 9th turn. He smiled helplessly and said, Mystical Silver Fox, Senior, if you know what a real Jinshin fighting method is, why don't you tell me? What do you think? Li Yundong said to the wall with a bit of self-mockery. In the past half a year, it could be said that he had been successful in both cultivation and fighting methods. He had never been like this, stuck at this juncture and blocked by an invisible film. He had obviously reached the Jinshin phase, but he had never been able to master the fighting skills that matched it. For Li Yundong, this was something he couldn't accept. However, when it came to cultivation, haste made waste. The more anxious Li Yundong was, the farther he found that he seemed to be from the answer. Even when he was meditating, his cultivation was regressing. It was also for this reason that Li Yundong didn't dare to practice hard anymore. He temporarily put aside the problem he was thinking hard about. Instead, he looked at the words carved by the mystical silver fox and reached out his hand curiously to touch the hard granite wall. He thought to himself, I really don't know how the mystical silver fox carved words on such a hard wall at first. Thinking of this, Li Yundong pressed his finger on a relatively flat stone surface. With a little force, he put his index and middle fingers together and dug down. At this time, Li Yundong had already entered the Jinshin phase. As soon as he exerted his strength, his fingers were like steel knives, scratching the stone surface with a clanging sound. However, Li Yundong saw that his fingers could only scratch white marks on the stone surface and could not carve any words on it, so he increased his strength and exerted force with his fingers. This time, Li Yundong immediately dug out a piece of granite from the stone surface, which was neither too big nor too small. The granite was as hard as steel. Li Yundong used the strength of his bare hands to forcefully dig out a stone from a rock without cracks. This kind of fierce strength was really frightening, but Li Yundong looked at the stone in his hand and frowned. He knew that he had to dig out a piece of stone from the smooth granite. Although it looked shocking, it was really a piece of cake compared to the writing on the stone surface of the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong used his bare hands to dig out the stone, which was just the most hard and fierce kung fu. However, the mystical silver fox used her bare hands to write on the stone surface, which was a combination of hard and soft kung fu. How could she control her own strength so that the hard stone would not be broken by force? This required the most yin and soft strength. Li Yundong naturally knew this truth, but after he had cultivated with Su Chan, there was more or less some yin qi in his body. Do I have to use yin qi to write on the stone surface? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he mobilized the yin qi in his body to carve words on the stone surface. But this time, Li Yundong found that he couldn't even move the stone. He knew that because he paid too much attention to yin qi, he didn't have enough yang qi. He only had soft strength but no strength. Li Yundong immediately smiled bitterly, shook his head, and said, "It's not easy to combine strength and softness and advance both yin and yang." Li Yundong raised his head and looked at the carved words on the wall. He was a little depressed in his heart. He had no choice but to turn around and leave the stone room. He simply went to the Taoist temple where the Fox Zen school used to be. While breathing the fresh air in the mountain, he relaxed his mood. At this time, there were quite a lot of tourists in Mount Tianlong. Li Yundong mixed in the crowd and followed the tourists to look around. It seemed that he was looking at flowers casually, but in fact, he was always thinking about the problem of carving words on the wall in his mind. The reason why the mystical silver fox could do it was because she was a great cultivator. But logically speaking, even if the mystical silver fox was a master in the golden immortal realm, there was no reason for her Jinshin realm to be so much worse than that of the mystical silver fox. Could it be that there were other mysteries? Li Yundong thought all the way, and before he knew it, he had arrived at the former residence of Lu Yi. Li Yundong pushed the door open and entered. He saw that the furnishings in the room were the same as before, but the table was covered with a faint layer of dust. Li Yundong looked around the room casually, then sat down at the desk in the room. He nestled in the wooden chair, raised his head, closed his eyes, and thought deeply about the doubts in his heart. But after thinking for a while, Li Yundong still couldn't figure it out. When he opened his eyes, he found that the bookshelf next to him was full of all kinds of Taoist classics and Buddhist classics. Li Yundong was bored, so he picked up a Buddhist scripture and read it quickly. Almost all of the Buddhist scriptures were short stories full of philosophy. They were short and concise, making people think deeply. At first, Li Yundong was a little dispirited, but as he read on, he became a little fascinated. especially when he saw one of the stories, his heart suddenly moved. The story was that once, when Zen Master Yin Feng of Mount Wutai was pushing a cart to carry things, he happened to meet Zen Master Mazu, who was sitting with his feet stretched out and resting. Zen Master Yin Feng asked Zen Master Mazu to retract his feet and make way for him, but Zen Master Mazu said stiffly, "I will only stretch out and not retreat." Zen Master Yin Feng was not willing to be outdone and said, "Then, I will only advance and not retreat." The two of them were in a stalemate. In the end, Zen Master Yin Feng pushed the cart forward regardless of everything. As a result, he ran over Zen Master Mazu's foot. When Zen Master Mazu returned to the temple, he immediately went to the hall to preach, holding an axe in his hand. Zen Master Mazu said to the people gathered in the temple, "Who ran over my foot just now? Come out." Zen Master Yin Feng walked quickly to Mazu and stretched out his neck without fear. However, Zen Master Mazu put down the axe and said gently, "You have no hesitation about your future. You can walk freely in the boundless world." Zen Master Yin Feng retracted his neck, knelt down to Zen Master Mazu, and then bowed and retreated. Zen Master Mazu praised him again. Being able to advance and retreat is a real magical item. The last sentence of the story suddenly made Li Yundong sit up straight. He covered his book with his hands, and his eyes flickered, as if he had learned something. This story is about a person who can be flexible and can advance and retreat is a truly great person. But what does it mean when it comes to cultivation? With my current cultivation, isn't it that I can advance and not retreat? That I can be hard but not soft, and that I can be yang but not yin? Li Yundong put down the book in his hand and quickly paced around the room. He muttered to himself like a crazy demon, "So, how can I be hard and soft, yin and yang, advance and retreat?" Li Yundong suddenly stopped, looked down at his hands, and said in a low voice, "The Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, and three gives birth to all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. What is the connection between the two? The Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, and three gives birth to all things. This is about the origin and development of the universe. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. This is about the process of cultivating man's nature and life. The Tao of man and earth is about the Zhuji phase of cultivators, opening up the 12 meridians, completing the cultivation of their own small universe, imitating the earth and strengthening their own self-repair and self-improvement functions. The Tao of earth and heaven refers to the cultivation realm of magic that cultivators cultivate through magic. The Tao of heaven refers to the cultivation realm of magic that cultivators break through the Yangshan phase and jump out of the mortal world of the three realms, get rid of the shackles of life, old age, illness, and death, and begin to reach the peak of the dual cultivation of life and death. Li Yundong was talking to himself quickly in the room like a madman. The more he spoke, the more excited he became, and the brighter his eyes became. Although what he said was no different from what he had repeated countless times before, this time, Li Yundong clearly felt as if he was running on the right path at full speed. Li Yundong didn't know what kind of feeling it was, but he had a feeling that, I seem to understand, and I seem to be very close to the answer. This kind of feeling happened to coincide with the Taoist concept of, Tao follows nature, and the Buddhist concept of, true self. What was Tao follows nature? Since ancient times, the great cultivators of various sects had written books to explain this point. But no matter how hard they tried, they found that Tao imitates nature was actually a superficial explanation, but it could not explain the true meaning of the realm. Once anyone reached this realm, they would understand that this was Tao imitates nature. However, if they were to explain it to their disciples, they would not be able to explain it in detail, let alone let them understand what kind of realm it was. As far as Li Yundong was concerned, that Tao follows nature, he understood was that since there was a difference between men and women in nature and the difference between yin and yang, then men and women had the beauty of human nature. The Tao gave birth to all things, and all things had the beauty of natural groups. The Tao gave birth to the 5 elements, and the 5 elements had the beauty of changing nature. The moon was naturally bright, and the sun was naturally illuminated. The Great Way transformed all things in the world, and all of them followed the rules of the laws of nature. All of them obtained the power of the origin of nature, and all of them returned to the root. This was, Tao follows nature. Li Yundong suddenly stopped and looked down at his hands with a fanatical look in his eyes. I'm so stupid. Why do I keep trying to carve words with the power of Jinshin? I always thought that the power of Jinshin was invincible and my strongest power. Naturally, I should try it with the strongest power. But I neglected one thing: no matter how hard granite is, it is still a material of the earth. It is also a natural thing that can't jump out of the 5 elements. Since human beings are the spirit of all things, cultivators are even more superior. Since they have the ability to control the 5 elements, why are they stupid enough to fight against this hard granite head-on? What about the 8 great freedom selves that I comprehended in the spirit space? What about my methods that can be big or small, far or near, more or less, light or heavy, and changeable? Why can I do this in the spirit space, but not in the spirit space? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly felt that a window had been opened in front of him, and a new world had finally opened to him. Because the spirit space is a world created by oneself, everything in the whole world can be mobilized by oneself. And the spirit space is not created by oneself, so it can't be done in the spirit space. Li Yundong couldn't help but show ecstasy on his face and said quickly. It's because cultivators found that they couldn't use magic at will in the boundless world like in the minor kiliocosm. That's why they advocated the natural way and advocated cultivating their own minor universe to be compatible with the outside universe. What is Tao follows nature? Tao follows nature is great liberation and great freedom. This is similar to the 8 great self-creation techniques of Buddhism. The reason why Buddhism and Taoism can be practiced together is because of this. The human body is its own spirit space, and the world is the outside universe. As long as the two are combined, they can achieve great liberation and great freedom in the spirit space. Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. There was a kind of hearty pleasure in his laughter. I understand. What is Jinshin fighting methods? Jinshin fighting methods is the unity of heaven and man. Everything in the world, including thunder and the 5 elements, is for me to use. Li Yundong didn't know that once he comprehended the Tao, he finally understood the realm of Jinshin fighting methods. From then on, there was finally a real invincible Li, in the Chinese cultivation world. Chapter 628. Li Yundong's laughter shook the sky, causing the tourists in the Taoist temple of Mount Tianlong to look in his direction curiously. At this time, Li Yundong was filled with the excitement of comprehending the realm, so he didn't care about shocking the world. His figure flashed, and in an instant, he rushed out of the Taoist temple like a wild horse. With just a few leaps, he jumped over the wall and rushed all the way to the secret room of the Fox Zen school, leaving the stunned tourists staring at his back in a daze. After returning to the cave, Li Yundong quickly rushed to the wall engraved with the heavenly Jin Dan technique. He stretched out his hands, pressed his 5 fingers on the wall, took a deep breath, and thought to himself, the earth element of the 5 elements corresponds to the spleen of the 5 internal organs of the human body. If I'm right, the spleen chi of the human body's own small universe can mobilize the earth element of the world's big universe. Thinking of this, Li Yundong closed his eyes and tried his best to activate the chi of the spleen in his 5 internal organs. The chi of the spleen in his 5 internal organs was yellow. In an instant, Li Yundong's face turned sallow, and a flowing yellow light quickly condensed on his fingertips. Why did cultivators have supernatural power? Why could they use magic? Because they used special methods to train their internal organs, 3 danshans, and spirit, so that the 5 chis could be Chao Yuan and the 3 splendors could be gathered. Man was the spirit of all living things. Only people could sense and connect with the big universe of heaven and earth with their own small universe. In China, whether it was Buddhism, Confucianism, or Taoism, almost all of them paid attention to the unity of heaven and man. They used their own small universe and the big universe of heaven and earth to reach the supreme realm of great cultivators. This was also why, for thousands of years, even if a monster wanted to cultivate, he had to first cultivate into a human body in order to reach the peak of cultivation. Although granite was hard, it was just a stone with a very tight structure. All the stones in the world belonged to the earth element, and the chi of the human body's spleen corresponded to the earth element of the 5 elements. In addition, Li Yundong had cultivated to the Jinshan phase at this time, and the chi of the 5 internal organs was incredibly powerful. He used the earth element chi of his own small universe to penetrate into the granite, and immediately stirred up the earth element molecular structure inside the granite. Li Yundong felt as if he was pressing on a soft sponge. The hard granite under his palms flowed like water, even rippling. Li Yundong moved his hand away from the rock, and the waves on the surface of the rock immediately disappeared. But when Li Yundong pressed his hand on it, wave-like lines began to appear on the surface of the rock again. Li Yundong smiled slightly and exerted a little force with his fingers. The rock on the surface of the rock turned into fine powder and fell down. It was as if Li Yundong was not digging out hard granite, but just a piece of dry bread. Li Yundong had comprehended the way of fighting, and the joy in his heart was indescribable. He thought for a moment, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He wrote a few big words on the side of the wall. Li Yundong was here. After writing, Li Yundong stood back and saw that the words of the mystical silver fox were dancing like dragons and phoenixes, strong and powerful. Every stroke was magnificent, showing an extremely profound knowledge of calligraphy. His own words were crooked and twisted, like chicken claws. If he looked at it alone, it would be fine, but when put together with the words of the mystical silver fox, it was really unsightly. Li Yundong laughed self-deprecatingly. He stretched out his hand and wiped the words on the wall as if he were wiping a blackboard. There was almost no trace left, only a few faint traces of his palm brushing the wall. Li Yundong laughed and said to himself, "Senior mystical silver fox, I won't leave words beside you to show my incompetence. This wall, it's better for you to have it all by yourself." Li Yundong smiled slightly and was about to turn around and leave. However, when he was about to enter the tunnel at the entrance of the cave, he suddenly stopped. Li Yundong suddenly turned his head and opened his eyes wide. He looked at the wall that his hand had wiped away in surprise and doubt, and a voice echoed in his mind. "Although I have practiced the heavenly Jindan technique to the 9th level, I have violated the divine punishment because of it. I think I will have to go through the tribulation in a few days. If I fail, my soul will be scattered. Therefore, I left the heavenly Jindan technique here. I hope that in the future, the successor of my Fox Zen school can succeed and save my scattered soul from heaven and earth, so that I can reappear in the world." At the Taoist assembly, Yan Fong had vowed to say these words and said that they had been left in the cave by the mystical silver fox. But at that time, Li Yundong did not see these words, so he only thought that what Yan Fong said was slander. But just now, Li Yundong had wiped away the writing on the stone with a casual swipe. This made Li Yundong suddenly think of one thing: could what Yan Fong said be true? Did the mystical silver fox really leave such a message? Or could it be that she had indeed left such a message, but someone had purposely erased it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong was suddenly moved. He couldn't help but walk quickly to the wall and carefully look at all the corners of the wall. Because there were so many big words engraved on this huge wall, almost everyone who saw this wall would be attracted by these big words, the scriptures recorded on the wall, and even the mystical silver fox who had carved these words. How could anyone pay attention to anything else? At this time, Li Yundong searched carefully. His hand went back and forth on the wall and touched it carefully. Sure enough, he found a trace of a palm smeared on the bottom left of this large paragraph of words. Li Yundong's face changed and he thought to himself, in the past, people wrote from right to left, from top to bottom. The mystical silver fox must have written the words in the bottom left corner at the end, and it was erased long ago. No wonder I didn't see it. But who was it that erased it? Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the burly and mysterious man he had seen in the cave. He thought to himself, is it him? But soon Li Yundong denied this idea. He thought to himself, no, I didn't see this piece of text when I first entered the cave. It means that someone had erased it before he came in. Who could it be? Could it be Lu Yi? Li Yundong suddenly seemed to understand something. He was horrified and couldn't help taking a step back. He stared at the domineering words on the wall with his eyes wide open and murmured, mystical silver fox Qianbei. You don't really want to be resurrected, do you? Or, is there really someone who wants to resurrect you? Could it be that everything Yan Fong said is right? Is Lu Yi secretly manipulating all this? Yes, it must be so. In this case, everything makes sense. Why was the golden snake I buried stolen? Why did Mei Nyang appear in Mount Gazao? So that's how it is. Lu Yi, do you really want to resurrect the mystical silver fox? No wonder Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple and Abbot Xinsheng of Jinshan Temple once asked me, what would you do if your close relatives and friends were evil and wanted to destroy the cultivation world? Li Yundong's original reverence for the mystical silver fox suddenly dissipated a lot. He said with a dark face, mystical silver fox Qianbei, although you have created many disasters in this world, I respect you as a strange woman and a legendary figure. For thousands of years, no fox demon has done so many earth-shattering things like you. No matter good or bad, this is a great thing. If you want to resurrect, I don't care for the time being, but if your resurrection will affect my relatives and friends. Li Yundong's face changed. He glared at the wall engraved with the mystical silver fox's handwriting and shouted sternly, as long as you dare to implicate them. Even if you are the invincible nine-tailed fox in the world, even if you climb out of the bottom of the 18 levels of hell and resurrect in the world, I will beat you back to the 18 levels of hell with my own hands. Li Yundong's words were sonorous and powerful, and his words were full of murderous intent. After he shouted, his voice echoed in the stone room for a while. Li Yundong took one last look at the wall full of handwriting. He said coldly, keep your handwriting first. If you really implicate my relatives and friends, I will not only send you back personally, but also kill the last trace of you in this world with my own hands. After that, Li Yundong walked away quickly without looking back. By the time Li Yundong returned to the balcony of his home in Tiannan City, it was already evening. Li Yundong stood on the balcony and looked inside through the gap in the screen window. He saw that the little foxes at home were gathered on the sofa in twos and threes, watching cartoons. Su Chan was on the carpet in the living room, leaning against the sofa with her head on Ling Yu's thigh. She was eating snacks and watching cartoons for children, giggling with the other little foxes. In the living room, Zhou Qin was wearing an apron around her waist and carrying a steaming plate of dishes out of the kitchen. Although Li Yundong was standing outside, he also smelled a strong aroma, which penetrated his nostrils. He couldn't help laughing. There's no need to ask, it must be Zi Yuan cooking. Only the food she cooks will be so fragrant, elegant and quiet, like tea. At this time, Wan Hongling was sitting at the table and shouting excitedly toward the kitchen, as if she was urging Zi Yuan to cook quickly. Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School were leaning lazily on the railing on the second floor. These two beautiful women were looking at everything in front of them with a smile, and their eyes were full of gentleness and satisfaction. What a warm and pleasant scene. Li Yundong suddenly realized that his home was so warm and moving. He hadn't noticed it before. How can I allow others to destroy such a beautiful and happy day? Li Yundong smiled slightly and reached out to push open the floor-to-ceiling window on the balcony. He secretly made up his mind in his heart, even the King of Heaven can't destroy the life in front of me. No one can hurt them. At this time, at the distant Kyoto airport in Japan, Lu Yi, who had specially disguised himself as an ordinary person, slowly walked down from the plane. He looked around and saw that there were people everywhere. Lu Yi stood in the airport building, which was echoing with soft voices, and sighed. He said, "It's been more than 10 years. I didn't expect to set foot on this land again. East Asians, your nightmare is about to come. In another day, you will panic and be unable to sleep all night because of the reappearance of the mystical silver fox. When she fully recovers her power, you will regret sealing the nine-tailed fox in this land. The anger of the mystical silver fox will devour you." Of course, not only you, but also those cultivation sects that have chased after her in the Fox Zen school, making us unable to live in peace. Chapter 629. Li Yundong pushed open the floor-to-ceiling window and returned home. The little foxes who were watching TV all looked at him in surprise. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with joy and said, "Yundong, you've come out of seclusion. How is it?" "Master, you're back." Zhou Qin turned her head and shouted in surprise and joy, "You've come out of seclusion." At this time, Ziyuan also heard the noise. She took off her apron and walked out of the kitchen. Unlike the others, she didn't ask, but just looked at Li Yundong carefully. Ziyuan saw Li Yundong standing in front of everyone with a smile. Although his appearance had not changed at all, there was a kind of insight in his eyes, as if he had seen through the rules of the universe and the operation of all things. Ziyuan had only seen this kind of gaze on one person, and that was her master, Wang Yuanshan. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said softly, "It seems that you have already understood what Jinshin fighting methods are." Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her. "Yes, I've already comprehended it." Su Chan and Zhou Qin were overjoyed when they heard this. Su Chan happily took Li Yundong's arm and giggled. "I knew that Yundong was the smartest. Sharpening your spear at the last moment will make you shine even if it's not fast." Zhou Qin asked curiously, "Master, what is the real Jinshin fighting methods? Can you teach us?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Jinshin fighting methods are nothing more than 4 words, unity of heaven and man." Zhou Qin and Su Chan were stunned at the same time and began to think in confusion. Ziyuan pondered slightly and looked thoughtful, while the little foxes were at a loss. Ruan Hongling, who was sitting at the table, thought for a while but couldn't figure it out. She gave up and urged, "Oh, don't think about it. Go and understand your own Tao. If you can understand it in such a short time, then everyone in the world will be masters of Jinshin fighting methods. Let's eat first." Ziyuan and the others thought that Ruan Hongling's words made sense, so they smiled and sat down at the table one after another. At this time, Ao Wushuang also came out of the room and stood on the second floor. She said to Li Yundong with a solemn face, "Leader, can you come up? I have something to tell you." He looked up and nodded at Ao Wushuang with a smile. Then he said something to Su Chan and followed Ao Wushuang into her room. As soon as he entered the room, he saw the Bahuang sword floating in the middle of the room, shining with a soft light. He was slightly stunned, but soon he seemed to understand something and turned to look at Ao Wushuang. The stunning beauty with a vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows was looking at the Bahuang sword in front of her reluctantly, as if she was looking at a child who was about to leave, or a lover who would never return. She said softly, "Leader, you are about to go to country R. This Bahuang sword has been with me for more than 10 years. Now I will give it to you." Hearing this, Li Yunyang immediately shook his head and said, No, Senior Ao Wushuang. This is your personal magic weapon and it's also a token of love from Wang Yuanshan. How can you give it to me? Token of love? Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing. "Leader, do you know why I asked Chon'er to come back to you after I took her away?" Li Yunyang asked curiously, "Why?" Ao Wushuang looked at Li Yunyang with flickering eyes and said with emotion, "Because I saw that you are a man of affection and righteousness, and you also have true feelings for Chon'er." So I asked her to come back again. In this world, everything is easy to get, whether it is magic, magic treasures, or even more powerful magic formations. As long as you work hard to learn and pursue them, you will be able to get them one day. But it is difficult to find a loving and righteous partner in the world. Li Yunyang, although I am your leader, since you call me senior, I will say something to you as a senior. Li Yunyang said respectfully, Senior, please go ahead. Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, if there is love between the two of them, why should they care about the token? The most fragile thing in the world is love, but it is also the most unshakable thing. Although Wang Yuanshan and I are separated from each other, and although we are demons and immortals, I always have him in my heart, and I believe that he will always have me in his heart. Why should I care about the token of love? Ao Wushuang handed the Bahuang sword to Li Yunyang with both hands and said, Li Yunyang, the love between Wang Yuanshan and me cares about the sky and the earth, but it doesn't care about this sword. It was originally a powerful magical weapon of the Linggong sect. Later, Wang Yuanshan gave it to me, and it has been with me for 10 years. But the thing I regret the most in my life is accepting this sword. As she spoke, Ao Wushuang gently stroked the body of the Bahuang sword, which was full of exquisite patterns. She sighed and said, if Wang Yuanshan hadn't given it to me, how could he have been caught? Alas, everything is fate. Li Yunyang, you are about to go deep into the tiger's den. You must not make the same mistake as Wang Yuanshan. You must accept this Bahuang sword. Even if you don't need it in the future, you can return it to Ziyuan and hand it back to the Linggong sect. It will be a relief to me. Hearing this, Li Yunyang couldn't help sighing. He stretched out his hand to take the Bahuang sword and said, in that case, it would be impolite of me to refuse. Seeing that Li Yunyang had accepted it, Ao Wushuang immediately looked happy. She had let Saionji Tsunekatsu go before, and she had always felt guilty. At this time, seeing Li Yunyang accept the Bahuang sword with a smile, the guilt in her heart disappeared a little, and her worry was reduced a lot. She said with a smile, Leader, this Bahuang sword and this sword were originally a mother and son sword. Only when the two swords are combined can the greatest power of this sword be exerted. Li Yunyang's heart skipped a beat. He smiled at Ao Wushuang and said, Senior Ao Wushuang, wait for me. As he said this, he went out of the door and stood in the corridor on the second floor. He shouted at the restaurant on the first floor, Zhou Qin, give me the sword. Zhou Qin responded and opened the colorful brocade pouch. The sword instantly turned into a bolt of lightning and appeared in front of Li Yunyang. Li Yunyang reached out to hold it, turned back to the room, and stood side by side with the Bahuang sword. He saw that the whole body of the Bahuang sword was showing a cyan light, while the whole body of the sword was showing a silver light. The two swords were floating in the air, but there seemed to be a barrier between them. Neither of them was willing to approach the other, and they were repelling each other. Li Yunyang asked in confusion, what's going on? How can I combine the two swords? Ao Wushuang smiled and said, I don't know how to combine the two swords. When Wang Yuanshan gave me the Bahuang sword, he didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. When I wanted to ask later, it was too late. Speaking of this, Ao Wushuang's expression was a little gloomy, but she soon forced a smile and said, Sect leader, you are amazing, even more talented than Wang Yuanshan. I believe you will be able to figure this out. Li Yunyang looked at the Bahuang sword and reached out to hold the hilt. He secretly activated his Jinqi, trying to subdue the sword. At first, the Bahuang sword was still trembling and struggling crazily, making bursts of buzzing sword sounds. However, when Li Yunyang was still in the Yangshan phase, his Jinqi was incredibly powerful. At this time, he was already a Jinshan master, and his Jinqi was so dense and condensed that it was incredible. The high magical power of the Bahuang sword came directly from its wielder, Ao Wushuang. Although Ao Wushuang was powerful, her strength lay in the powerful physical combat ability of her fox spirit after she revealed her true form and the various magic she was proficient in, not in how strong her own magical power and Jinqi were. Wherever Li Yunyang's Jinqi went, the Bahuang sword's own magical power and Jinqi were defeated. It was like a hot knife cutting through cheese, with irresistible force. The Bahuang sword only resisted for a while before it announced that it had changed owners. It stopped struggling and lay docilely in Li Yunyang's palm like a tamed horse. With a thought from Li Yunyang, the body of the Bahuang sword made a cracking sound of iron rubbing against each other. The body of the sword split into small iron blades, which quickly assembled into the shape of an iron lotus throne. They rotated quickly, making a creepy sound. In the past, Li Yunyang had faced this rapidly rotating iron lotus throne more than once. At this time, observing it at a close distance, he felt that the opening and closing of the teeth were really as terrifying as a meat grinder. Even the hardest metal in the world would be instantly ground into powder if it fell in. Ao Wushuang watched from the side as the powerful magical weapon she had kept close to her for 10 years finally became someone else's treasure. For a moment, she felt a little lost, but she quickly adjusted her mentality and said with a smile, "Leader, the Bahuang sword is best at one-on-one combat. Even if it encounters an opponent with a higher cultivation than it, it has the ability to deal with him or even defeat him. Among the 5 great swords of Taoism in the world, except for the Xianyuan sword, which can defeat the Bahuang sword, the other swords may not be a match for it." Li Yunyang chuckled and held the sword with his other hand. He wanted to combine the 2 swords into one through his Jinqi. However, as soon as Li Yunyang connected the auras of the 2 swords, he immediately felt that the 2 swords were struggling wildly and painfully, as if they were enduring a kind of painful torture. Seeing this, Ao Wushuang hurriedly said, "No, you can't force them to merge like this. These 2 swords were originally like a huge magnet. When they were put together, there was no abnormality. However, one day, someone suddenly split it into 2 halves. Then, there was a strong repulsive force at the place where the 2 halves were split. I didn't know why, nor did I know how to eliminate it. Leader, don't try it by force, or you will hurt the powerful magical weapon." Li Yunyang saw that there was a faint crack on the bodies of the 2 swords. He immediately felt a chill in his heart and didn't dare to try again. He withdrew his Jinqi, and soon the cracks on the swords slowly disappeared. Li Yunyang shook his head and said, "It's really strange." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, "Leader, you can think about it slowly in the future. Don't rush for success. In the past 10 years, I've thought about it for a long time, but I haven't figured out the trick or the reason. Although the 2 swords can't be combined, you have the Bahuang sword and the Bahuang sword at the same time, which will still be very powerful. It will be much safer for you to go to Japan." Li Yunyang laughed and said, "Thank you, Senior Ao Wushuang." Ao Wushuang felt ashamed in her heart. She quickly asked, then, "Leader, when are you going to set off? Will you take others with you?" Just as Li Yunyang was about to speak, he heard a few voices coming from the door. They said in unison, "Take me there." Chapter 630. When Li Yundong heard the noise, he looked back and saw Zhou Qin and Su Chan sneakily sticking their heads out of the door. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and shouted, "Are you 2 eavesdropping?" Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said carefully, "You've been talking for too long. The dishes are getting cold." Zhou Qin said with concern, "Master, the people of Zhenyan Tantrism are very arrogant. You can't go alone. At least one more person will go and you'll have one more helper." Su Chan also nodded her head like a chick pecking rice. "Yes, yes, yes." Li Yundong pulled a long face and shouted, "Yes, my ass. Do you think it's useful to have 2 more people? Don't you know what you're capable of?" Su Chan pouted and muttered unhappily, "I just want to help you." Li Yundong smiled helplessly. He nodded to Ao Wushuang and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, let's go downstairs for dinner." He walked over to the little girl, tapped the tip of her nose, and said with a smile, "You're helping me if you wait for me at home." When Zhou Qin saw that Li Yundong had rejected Su Chan so straightforwardly, she sighed in her heart. Just as she was about to give up, she suddenly saw Zi Yuan looking at Li Yundong with concern. Her heart skipped a beat, and she secretly had an idea. After the group of people had a lively dinner, Zhou Qin quietly went to Zi Yuan's room. At this time, Zi Yuan was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the room. She smiled slightly without opening her eyes and said, "What's wrong with you again?" Zhou Qin smiled a little embarrassedly. "How did you know?" Zi Yuan closed her eyes and said with a smile, "I already knew when you looked at me just now. Do you want to secretly go to Japan with Li Yundong?" Seeing that Zi Yuan was straightforward, Zhou Qin didn't hide it anymore. She quickly walked to Zi Yuan, sat down cross-legged, and said very seriously, "Yes." At this time, Zi Yuan opened her eyes and said with a very serious face, "Last time, although it was my shimmy who encouraged you to go to Mount Huangshan, I also know that you added fuel to the fire. Zhou Qin, we won't be as lucky as last time every time." Seeing that Zi Yuan had exposed her, Zhou Qin braced herself and said, "Zi Yuan, listen to me. I don't want to cause trouble for Master. I'm just thinking. Master is always fighting alone, and we can't help him. Although my cultivation speed is very fast, compared to Master, I feel that he is running faster and faster in front of me. I can't catch up at all. Aren't you afraid that we will become a burden in the future?" Zi Yuan asked, "But what does this have to do with you going to Japan?" Zhou Qin asked, "Don't you want to know what a real Jinshin fighting method is?" Zi Yuan laughed and said, "Li Yundong has already said that Jinshin fighting is the unity of heaven and man. As long as we follow this train of thought and practice in the future, I think we will be able to comprehend it one day." Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "No, it's not as good as witnessing a real high-level battle with my own eyes. As long as we see what a real golden body duel looks like, we can comprehend it faster, right?" Zhou Qin's words immediately moved Zi Yuan. She lowered her head and pondered. It was true that as Zhou Qin had said, when it came to cultivation, there was a big difference between being enlightened and not being enlightened. A master like Tsuruko Tachibana had been trapped in a very simple predicament for more than 10 years. If Zhou Qin hadn't inadvertently pointed it out, he would have continued to be trapped. The election of the curator of the ancient meaning school and the new meaning school of Mount Koya originally had nothing to do with other cultivation sects, but the cultivators of other sects were also willing to come and watch. The purpose was to witness the fierce and wonderful battle between high-level cultivators. Sometimes, witnessing a high-level and wonderful battle was far better than cultivating for a year or even longer. Zi Yuan thought about it seriously and said, if Li Yundong loses, what will you do?" Zhou Qin was stunned. Since Master has already comprehended the secret of Jinshin fighting methods, with his experience of defeating the strong with the weak in the past, he will definitely not lose. However, Zi Yuan asked relentlessly, "If he loses, what will you do?" Zhou Qin thought for a moment and gritted her teeth. "I'll save him even if I have to risk my life." Zi Yuan sighed and said, "You see, this is what I'm most worried about. I'm afraid that if you fail to save him, you will also be in trouble. The overall strength of the Japanese cultivation world is not inferior to that of our Chinese cultivation world. Moreover, there must be many masters in Mount Koya that day. Not to mention you, even if we go together, we will all be prisoners. If Li Yundong is alone nearby, even if he can't escape, his young spirit can escape, and it will be very difficult for others to keep him. Besides, if Li Yundong loses, he will be safe. The arrogant Japanese cultivation world will definitely let him back to humiliate our Chinese cultivation world." Zhou Qin snorted angrily. "They are dreaming. Master will definitely not lose." Zi Yuan said, "But if he wins, I will be worried that the Japanese cultivation world will be angry and detain him." Zhou Qin stood up and said angrily, "Then we can't let them succeed." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Don't worry, I have a way." Zhou Qin curiously sat on the ground again and asked, "What is it?" Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and whispered a few words in Zhou Qin's ear. Zhou Qin was stunned and asked suspiciously, how can that work? The next day, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan, welcomed a sunny day. The major Japanese media had sent special teams to the vicinity of Mount Koya early in the morning, ready to broadcast this grand event in the Japanese cultivation world live. Because Japan was a religious country, almost all of its citizens believed in Buddhism, and there were tens of millions of people who believed in Jinyin Tantrism. Therefore, the election of the chief of the ancient meaning faction and the new meaning faction of the Jinyin Tantrism could be said to be a grand event for the Japanese people. According to the Japanese media, at least 20 million Japanese people would watch the live broadcast that day. On this day, many believers had fasted and bathed early, waiting devoutly at the foot of Mount Koya. Not long after, the gate of Mount Koya temple opened. The monks on the mountain, dressed in cassocks, slowly poured out in an orderly manner like a tide. The leader was an old monk in a red cassock. It was Kaisai Hikaryuni. Behind him were two old monks in purple cassocks. These two old monks stood on the left, holding a scripture in one hand. It was the treasure that Tang Mi's seventh-generation patriarch, Master Huigua, had passed on to the eighth-generation patriarch, Hongfa. The one on the right was holding an extremely exquisite and luxurious Vajrapestle. This Vajrapestle was made of pure gold and was inlaid with gems. It was gorgeous and dazzling. Behind the two old monks were 2 rows of middle-aged monks in purple kasayas. They were all great cultivators of the junior monk rank or above, and only monks of the junior monk rank or above were qualified to wear purple kasayas. These monks held wooden fish in one hand and kept knocking with the other, chanting incantations softly. Behind them were the monks below the grand primogenitor. Some of them were holding sticks, alms bowls, huge vajrapestles, or long swords in their hands. They came in all shapes and sizes, representing the different sects of the ancient meaning sections. When the major Japanese TV stations, newspapers, and online media, who had been surrounding the foot of the mountain for a long time, saw these monks coming out, they immediately huddled together. Among them, a Mitsubishi van marked with words was the most conspicuous. It grabbed the front position. Several burly men and a female broadcaster, who looked very capable, quickly jumped out of the car and rushed to the front of the crowd to seize the favorable terrain for the live broadcast. When the other media saw that the big brother was taking the lead, they were not willing to be outdone. They swarmed up and blocked both sides of the road. On both sides of the avenue, there was a young boy carrying a camera marked with AV on his shoulder and a beautiful female host in a black uniform with a hot and sexy figure. The two of them couldn't squeeze in from the outside and could only anxiously walk around in circles. The young boy said bitterly, "Qianbei Ida, what should we do? If we can't get a picture, we will be scolded by the section chief." The hostess named Xiangtian also stamped her feet anxiously and said, "Idiot, don't I know that? Hey, you are a man, aren't you? If you can't squeeze in, can't you?" The young boy looked at the impenetrable wall of people in front of him. He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and rushed inside with a shout. Unexpectedly, as soon as he rushed in, he was picked up by a big man. When the man saw the word V on his camera, he sneered and said, "Wakayama TV station? How dare a nobody be so presumptuous? Get out. Go to the back." After saying that, he threw the young boy behind him. The young boy was thrown out like a piece of straw. The boy fell on his face and got up in a mess. Ida caught up with him and said in horror, "Is the machine all right?" The boy also held the camera next to him in his arms nervously. After checking it over and over again, he breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Fortunately, the camera is fine." Seeing his silly look, Ida was so angry that she kicked him in the calf and said angrily, "Idiot, you're really useless. I'm so angry. The team is about to pass. If we can't get anything, how can we explain it when we go back? Do you want to quit?" The boy got up with a look of horror on his face. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault." Xiangtian glared at him and looked around with a face full of unwillingness. Suddenly, she saw the maple trees on both sides of the road. Her eyes suddenly lit up. She picked up her skirt and ran towards the big tree. In a few seconds, she climbed up the tree in an extremely inelegant posture. The young boy looked at her in astonishment and stammered, "Qianbei Ida, what are you doing?" Ida shouted angrily, "Idiot, hand me the camera. Then climb up by yourself. What are you waiting for?" The young boy seemed to have woken up from a dream. He quickly climbed up the tree and began to shoot from a high position. On this avenue, many media reporters were unable to squeeze their way into the seats they wanted, especially the powerful television stations that occupied almost all of the best seats, not leaving a single drop of soup for their peers. When these people saw the reporters and hosts of Wakayama TV station climbing up the tree like monkeys to do a live broadcast, their eyes suddenly lit up. They shouted one after another and did the same thing. For a time, the trees on and under the avenue were crowded with people. Many hosts were introducing the live broadcast scene to the TV screen. It was so lively at the foot of Mount Koya that it was like a pot of boiling porridge. After the monks of the ancient meaning school of Mount Koya wandered around the mountain, the monks of the new meaning school soon joined in. After a circle around the mountain, they slowly walked into Kongabuji. At this time, the journalists of the major media rushed to Kongabuji like crazy. With the previous experience, Ida quickly climbed up a big tree with the young boy with the best angle and concentrated on her own report. What the ancient meaning school and the new meaning school showed in front of the world was not the amazing scene of fighting, but the scene of the debate of Buddhist principles. In front of the world, the position of the chief of the Xinyan Tantrism was decided by the two sides arguing about Buddhist principles. The media audience and the judges of the major schools judged who won and who lost. This debate was long and cumbersome. The eminent monks of the two schools took turns to fight, and their saliva flew everywhere. The bald head and the bald donkey were the same. After a few hours, the interest of the journalists of the major media obviously declined. The young boy stuck the camera on a tree branch, aimed it at the lens and focal length, and looked left and right. After looking for a while, he suddenly realized that there were two television station employees, a man and a woman, whispering to each other under the tree. The young boy pulled Ida beside him and pointed to the tree silently. His expression seemed to be saying, "Look." It was the largest TV station in Japan, and it was also a world-class TV station. Almost all Japanese TV practitioners yearned to enter the television St. Hall. Ida looked at them angrily, stared at the young boy in front of her, and said in a low voice, "What's the big deal? Isn't it?" However, the little boy tilted his head with interest and listened to the conversation between the two people below. His absent-minded attitude angered the dedicated host. Xiangtian punched the little boy in the shoulder and said in a low voice, "What are you doing?" The young boy seemed to have dug out a big treasure. He made a gesture of silence to Ida, indicating that she should listen to what the two people below said. At first, Ida was angry and disapproving, but soon what the two people said attracted her attention. "Hey, Rumiko, what's so interesting about such a boring debate? Why did the section chief ask us to shoot it? Just find a random rookie and you'll be fine." "Tut, you don't understand. Hey, let me tell you in a low voice. The section chief has received internal information that this is actually just a cover to deceive the world. The real winner is an internal fight." "Fight? What fight? The school of ancient meaning and the school of new meaning? Well, this one is beautiful." No. Of course not. Then what is it, Rumiko? Tell me quickly." He, beg me." "Well, you little slut, I'll teach you a good lesson tonight." He, don't make trouble. Be careful not to be seen. Then tell me quickly. Don't hide it. Well, don't tell anyone. Just follow me to secretly take photos later. It's said that the fight will be between Masako Tachibana, the goddess of Xinyan Tantrism, and a man. Hearing this, Ida and the young boy in the tree both raised their heads and looked at each other in confusion. A man? A Chinese? What does the election of the director of Xinyan Tantrism have to do with the Chinese? You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.